Chapter 532. A total of 30 people left the group and charged forward. This scene was witnessed by the commander of the Jiaozhi army, General Fan Yuhai. Although he did not know what these people were doing, his instincts told him that they were up to no good. However, even though he knew this, he did not have any better ideas. After all, the movement speed of the Iron Shield soldiers was too slow. If he sent other people to charge forward, they would be met with countless musket fire. It was no different from seeking death. The only thing he could do now was to wait and see what the other side was going to do. Of course, if the other side really rushed to 100 meters away from him, then the crossbowmen in the iron carriage would be able to play their role. Those crossbows had been heavily modified and could shoot up to 130 meters away. Within this distance, they were the kings of existence. Obviously, the rocket launchers had a range of 200 meters, so they definitely wouldn't rush into the range of 130 meters. When the distance reached 180 meters, they took the initiative to stop. Then, they put the rocket launchers on their shoulders and prepared to fire the rocket launchers. What are they doing? Seeing this scene, the Jiaozhi soldiers could not help but stop in their tracks. Even the Iron Shield soldiers and Iron Chariot soldiers did the same. Before figuring out the enemy's goal, no one would foolishly charge forward. Under everyone's gaze, the 5 soldiers with the rocket launchers launched their unique attack. Boom 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 boom, 5 strong lights flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, they were accompanied by a series of loud rumbling sounds. In the front row of the Jiaozhi army, the Iron Shield soldiers were engulfed by the powerful force of the rocket launchers and fell to the ground. Even 2 out of the 10 iron chariots were hit. The instantaneous high temperature and the aftermath of the explosion turned the iron chariots into fiery red chariots. The Jiaozhi soldiers inside were turned into roasted ducks. No! Seeing how powerful the rocket launcher was, Fan Yuhai, who was hiding behind the Iron Shield soldier, screamed in pain. As if to prove his cry, a series of gunshots were heard. The Jiaozhi soldiers who were not protected by the Iron Shield soldiers became the targets of the mercenaries. As the bullets flew, the Jiaozhi soldiers fell to the ground one after another. Boom 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 boom. Another wave of rocket launchers was launched, and the shield-wielding soldiers were sent flying into the air. 2 more armored vehicles were hit and turned into scrap metal. More and more Jiaozhi soldiers were exposed and became the targets of the mercenaries. Every moment, every breath, every second, the Jiaozhi soldiers would lose their lives. The scales of victory on the battlefield seemed to be tilting in their favor. All troops, attack! Fan Yuhai, who was protected by a group of personal guards, saw more and more soldiers being shot. He knew that if he continued to wait, the morale of the army would crumble and they would definitely lose the battle. Thus, he directly gave the order for the entire army to charge. Fortunately, there was only a distance of 500 meters between the 2 sides. As long as they were fast enough, there was still a chance for them to reach the mercenaries. If that was the case, the situation would very likely develop in their favor. Retreat. Seeing that the Jiaozhi soldiers had launched their attack, the rocket launchers who originally wanted to continue the fight hurriedly retreated. They formed a group of 6. After countless rounds of training, the speed of their retreat was so fast that the pursuing Jiaozhi soldiers could only look on in the dust. Furthermore, if they wanted to continue the pursuit, they would have to face the rain of bullets. Yes, it was a rain of bullets. If Yang Qindong knew that the Jiaozhi army would send out a large number of soldiers, he would have prepared 9 squad machine guns for the 3rd Battalion of Lingfeng. On average, each squad would have 1 machine gun. He also prepared 3 rounds of bullets in order to prevent the Jiaozhi soldiers from suddenly charging forward. As such, the soldiers of the Jiaozhi army surged forward like a tidal wave, and what welcomed them was a torrent of bullets. When the squad machine guns fired at a rate of nearly 1,000 bullets per minute, the charging Jiaozhi soldiers fell to the ground in droves. This attack greatly suppressed the momentum of the Jiaozhi soldiers charging forward. No one was unafraid of death. So what if they were elite soldiers? With the help of the squad machine guns, the charging momentum of the Jiaozhi soldiers was greatly suppressed. This caused the 2 generals, Fan Yuhai and Chen Heijin, to have a pained expression. Chen Heijin's eyes were filled with tears when he saw his elite black soldiers charge forward crazily and fall to the ground one by one, unable to stand up again. These black soldiers were the elites that he had accumulated over many years in the army. With them, he was able to achieve what he wanted. It was only because of them that the Jiaoji army dared to go against the Southern Ming Empire and even interfere with their internal affairs. But now, under such a large number of deaths, how could Chen Heijin, as a general, not feel heartache? Get me an elephant. I want to go into battle personally. He could not watch the deaths in his hands. More importantly, he could not even get within 200 meters of the enemy. At this moment, Chen Heijin was furious. Not only that, he even made the decision to go into battle personally. General. Naturally, some of Chen Heijin's personal guards wanted to stop him. However, Chen Heijin, who was in a killing frenzy, would not listen to his subordinates' advice. He shook his head and walked towards an elephant. 20,000 war elephants. This was the strongest force that the Jiaoji army had. It was also the only chance of victory. After all, elephants had thick skin and flesh. Perhaps they were the only ones that could ignore the bullets and charge into the mercenary camp. Chen Heijin climbed onto the back of the elephant. He had already placed a chain around it to ensure that it would not fall off if it moved. Then, he waved the long sword in his hand and shouted the word, "Kill." Chen Heijin led 20,000 elephant soldiers and tens of thousands of black soldiers in a suicidal charge. Thump 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 thump, the heavy elephant body stomped on the ground, bringing with it a series of rumbling sounds. When the 20,000 elephants attacked from the front and back, the momentum was terrifying. On the side of the mercenaries, the 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries were shocked. As a former member of the Jiaoji people, they knew a thing or two about these war elephants. Some of them even knew that the elephant army played a decisive role in the battle against the great Ming dynasty's musketeers. Now, could the musketeers of the mercenaries stop the elephants from getting closer? If they could not, once these war elephants charged into the camp, they would start wreaking havoc. Once the rest of the Jiaoji army charged in, would they still be able to win? It was no wonder that the Jiaoji mercenaries were so afraid. After all, the mindset of first sight is the most important thing could affect a person. While they were worried, the remaining 6 iron chariots of the Jiaoji army started to move forward. The thousands of iron shield soldiers who had regrouped were moving behind the elephant army. They looked like they were going to take advantage of the situation and charge forward. This was the real attack. The Jiaoji army was unleashing their last bit of potential. It was not an exaggeration to say that if they could withstand this wave, the Jiaoji army would not be able to fight anymore. On the other hand, if they could not withstand this wave, the mercenaries would be completely defeated. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Fire as hard as you can. Grenade squad, concentrate all the grenades. When they get close, blast them. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Cold Front, Luo Pa, shouted. At the same time, he ordered the 5 rocket launchers to prepare for attack. Battalion commander, shouldn't we stop for a while? The machine guns used by our 9 squads are all red. If this continues, I'm afraid they will be scrapped. Company Commander Tian Su came to Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin's side and said anxiously. The squad machine guns were their treasures. They could not waste them after just one use. That would be the biggest waste. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin only hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, since that is the case, let's rest the machine guns first. Everyone, switch to the 9-5, continuous fire style. At the same time, be prepared to retreat. Kong Chuanshin hesitated for a while before saying the last sentence. This battle was indeed enjoyable. However, the Jiaoji elites were elites after all. Their fearless charging style had truly frightened them. The distance between them and the Jiaoji elites was getting closer and closer. Once they got close, no matter how good they were at fighting, they would not be able to gain the upper hand in a chaotic one-on-one battle. Furthermore, the cold vanguard was a treasure. If the cold vanguard suffered heavy losses because of this, he wouldn't know how to answer to the others. If that really happened, his position as a battalion commander would come to an end. Company Commander Tian Su hesitated for a moment when he heard Battalion Commander Tian Su say to be prepared to retreat. However, he quickly understood. Retreating did not mean admitting defeat. It was just a strategy. Just like what the sixth young master said, only by preserving one's strength would one be able to effectively defeat the enemy. If one died, then what was the point of fighting? Company Commander Tian Su went to pass on the order. Kong Chuanxin held the 9.5 style in his hand and fired a dozen more bullets. At least a few Jiaoji soldiers died under his gun. Even a charging Jiaoji war elephant had more than one bullet embedded in its right front leg. It fell to one knee with a loud thud. While the Jiaoji soldier on it was flung away, it also brought a lot of resistance to the charging elephants behind it. However, only a small number of elephants fell to the ground. It was not enough to stop the charging momentum of the main force of the Jiaoji army. In front of the silver-armored war elephants, the power of the bullets was indeed weakened by a lot. Especially after the number of war elephants reached tens of thousands, the pressure on the mercenaries who only had a little more than 3,000 soldiers with firearms obviously increased. Chapter 533. The rocket launchers were fired, and the war elephants that were hit either fell to the ground or ran away in fear. It did alleviate some of the pressure on the main force of the mercenaries, but it still didn't have much effect on the overall situation. In the rear, Tiger's Mane put down the binoculars in his hand and said to Yang Qindong worriedly, "Young master, the soldiers in front are under a lot of pressure." Yes, they are under a lot of pressure. But when there is pressure, there is motivation, so that these boys don't have their noses up in the sky every day. They look like they are the boss, the second boss, and the third boss. Yang Qindong said this with a smile. Seeing that the young master could still talk and laugh here, Tiger's Mane couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that the young master had a way to turn the situation around. Okay. Sure enough, when he saw that the war elephants were less than 150 meters away from the cold front, Yang Qindong finally stopped joking. Instead, he said to the first and second guards who were still standing in front of the 5 mortars, "Prepare to fire, adjust the distance to 50 meters behind the war elephants." Although when the distance was close, the mercenaries still had a wave of grenades in their hands to attack. But if the opponent was only a few hundred war elephants, they could give it a try, but against 20,000, it was a bit insufficient. And if the war elephants really rushed into the mercenaries' team, the consequences would be unimaginable, and it was not something that Yang Qindong wanted to see. The first and second guards who had been waiting anxiously immediately began to operate the mortars. They even had a competition to see who could hit more accurately. In this regard, Yang Qindong naturally crossed his arms and watched the battle from the side. He had already taught the key points of operation to them, and it turned out that these team members also learned very quickly, which made him very relieved. The result of his relief was that when the mortar shells were fired again, they landed on the spot that Yang Qindong pointed out, and then fell into the elephant herd, sending countless elephants flying. The powerful shells were not comparable to rocket launchers, and the direct result was that the elephant herd was in chaos. After all, they were animals, not humans. Although they had all been trained, under the stimulation of the thunderous sound and the fiery light, these war elephants revealed their instincts and began to run in all directions. This caused the Jiaoji soldiers near them to suffer, and they became meat paste under the feet of the war elephants. Even the Jiaoji soldiers riding on the war elephants didn't fare any better. Faced with the disobedient war elephants, they were either thrown away or directly killed by the shells. Chen Heijin, one of the famous generals of Jiaoji, was unfortunately hit by a shell under such circumstances, and it happened to be in the center of the battlefield. His entire body instantly turned into countless pieces, and his original appearance could no longer be seen. There was a saying that success and failure depended on the same person. The hope that they had placed their hopes on had now become the biggest threat. The moment the Jiaoji soldiers were mercilessly trampled, it was already announced that the attack had failed. In addition, the mercenaries took this opportunity to launch a frenzied counterattack. Some of the brave soldiers directly rushed out and threw the grenades in their hands forward, causing balls of fire to appear, and then, there was no more and then. The morale of the Jiaoji soldiers had been completely extinguished. Even one of the famous generals, Fan Yuhai, saw that the situation was turning for the worse, and led 20,000 elite soldiers to escape in another direction outside the city. As for the soldiers who did not follow General Fan, what they needed to do now was to escape back to Shiyu City. It seemed that this was the only way to ensure their safety. However, at a time like this, where could there be a safe place? It was the same in Shiyu City. After Chindi led his subordinates and the Qin clansmen to destroy all the catapults in the city, they didn't face the attack of the Jiaoji army. Instead, they were ignored and ignored. After the news of the defeat at the front lines had spread, even King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had escaped Shiyu City under the protection of the Crown Prince's 5,000 guards, and were heading towards the commandery city. The king and Crown Prince had escaped, and so had General Fan. General Chen had died in battle, and the soldiers below him were like headless flies. Who would care about what Chindi was doing? Especially the 100,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were waiting at the north and south of the city. They were like abandoned children, and no one cared about them. According to the original plan, when the 100,000 elite Jiaoji soldiers charged from the east of the city, the 100,000 soldiers of the Jiaoji soldiers would charge out from the north and south gates, and cooperate with the main force to attack the mercenaries' camp. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. However, the moment the mortars were fired, the ordinary Jiaoji soldiers were afraid. They didn't want to face death, especially when they knew that in the original plan, they were just scapegoats and shields. It was normal for them to hesitate for a while. It was the hesitation of the generals that caused the soldiers below to react. When the order was given to open the city gates and charge at the mercenaries, they didn't want to do it. It wasn't a collective strike, but at least most of the people with brains stood in place and didn't move. When the generals saw that the soldiers didn't follow their orders, although they were angry, they didn't dare to do anything overboard. Who knew if the soldiers would attack them if they were forced into a corner? It was at this time that news came from the front lines. The main elite force had been defeated, the king and the crown prince had fled, and the catapults that had been placed all over the city in preparation for street battles had been destroyed by Chen Di, Magistrate Chen. It was also said that Magistrate Chen had joined the mercenaries and obtained a certain amount of authority. With so much news spreading, the 100,000 ordinary Jiaoji generals were confused. They had been abandoned and couldn't find a way forward. However, some of the smarter ones sent people to contact Chen Di. They wanted to see if there were any benefits to be gained from joining the mercenaries. It wasn't that these generals didn't have a code of brotherhood, but under the circumstances, this was the best choice. One had to know that the puppet army wasn't just a product of one country. As such, the entire Shiyu city began to fall into internal strife with different thoughts. This chaotic situation lasted for a total of 5 days. During these 5 days, the mercenaries stood guard outside the east gate, showing no intention of entering the city. According to Yang Chendong's words, it was a mess. If they entered now, it would be troublesome. There might even be some unnecessary deaths. He didn't want to see such worthless sacrifices. The mercenaries were all treasures, and even the auxiliary soldiers were future treasures. He didn't want to see any of them die just because they went to clean up a mess that they had already won. Thus, the best way was to wait. He would wait for Chen Di and Yang to clear up the order in the city before entering. Of course, he didn't do anything during these 5 days. There were close to 50,000 captives outside the east gate under his command. These were the elites of Jiaoji. Furthermore, they were made up of strong men and adult men. They were a rich source of manpower. With close to 50,000 captives, the 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries were naturally put to good use. They were in charge of guarding the captives while the auxiliary soldiers were in charge of screening and registration. The mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers were in charge of guarding the captives. The cooperation went smoothly. However, Yang Chendong was dissatisfied that 20,000 captives had escaped. Even the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai, had escaped. Thus, the battle outside the East Gate had only killed 30,000 people. However, this was already enough to set the foundation for Jiaoxi's downfall. This was because good news had just come from the commandery city. King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who had escaped there, had already snuck into the commandery city. They had been captured alive by Wu Sheng, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front 2nd Regiment. Wu Sheng had led the 1st Battalion of the main force and 2 auxiliary battalions to fight in the Langsun region. At the peak of the battle, they had faced Chen Heijin's 30,000 black soldiers and Wang Gingwang's 30,000 Jiaoxi soldiers. Even so, Wu Sheng and his men weren't at a disadvantage. Relying on their training in the rainforest, superior equipment, and close cooperation, they had killed 20,000 enemies and lost less than 200 men. After seeing Chen Heijin retreat to Shiyu City, the remaining 1,000 men had followed orders to the commandery city. They had quietly infiltrated the city and occupied it without leaving a trace. Only when King Li and his men were surrounded did they know that there was no way out. After a series of battles, General Wan Shaozhong had been killed, and King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had been captured. This also marked the fall of the Jiaoxi kingdom. Just a few days ago, Chen Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, who had defeated 100,000 Lansang soldiers and occupied Yinglu City, had returned. Along with him were 90,000 Lansang soldiers. Suddenly, the number of captives had reached 150,000, and the pressure was not small. Fortunately, there were 45,000 young and knowledgeable people from Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoxi Nation. Their arrival alleviated the pressure on the captives. They only needed to wait for 2 more days for the Niatong regiment to take over the captives, and the situation would be settled. From the time they entered Jiaoxi until now, it had only been a month. Counting from the time they entered the Langsun region, it had only been 50 days. The arrogant Jiaoxi army that dared to challenge the Great Ming at its peak had been wiped out. Now, other than a few cities that were still guarded by Jiaoxi soldiers, most of the main cities had been taken over by the mercenaries. It could be said that from this moment onwards, Yang Qindong could announce to the world that Jiaoxi had been destroyed. 5 days later, Shiyu City was no longer as chaotic as before. After Chen Di asked for instructions, and Yun Ke passed the message, the East City Gate was opened once more, and a large number of Jiaoxi soldiers walked out. Chapter 534. Just this number alone amounted to about 100,000. All in all, there were a total of 250,000 adult male captives. Once they were sent to Qiqian City, it would greatly reduce the manpower pressure there. Yang Qindong could finally breathe a sigh of relief. 3 days later, Commander Niatong of the Navy led 10,000 men to Shiyu City and began to take over the 250,000 captives. They would be sent out of Jiaoxi to Qiqian City in 3 batches. The overall situation was set. Another 3 days later, the envoy from Jiaoxi to Southern Ming and the imperial eunuch Kai Gu finally appeared outside Shiyu City. Speaking of which, it was quite tragic. Along the way from Nanjing, they had encountered all sorts of problems. For example, they had encountered horse bandits 5 times and were besieged by disaster victims. Although their lives were not in danger in the end, it had greatly hindered their progress. As such, they had only just arrived outside Shiyu City when they realized that the main army of Jiaoxi had been annihilated. Not only that, even the king and crown prince of Jiaoxi had been captured alive. They were unable to accept this outcome. They had said that they were here to announce the imperial edict for the Duke of Loyalty to withdraw from Jiaoxi, but now, it seemed that they had been dreaming. When Yang Qindong received news of the arrival of Zhu Qizhen's envoy, he was waiting in the temporary palace of Shiyu City to meet with Li and Li Yuanlong. Thus, when he heard Tiger's Mane's report, he casually said, "Arrange for them to stay in an inn in the city first. It won't be too late to meet them after I'm done with the matters here." This was not Yang Qindong being arrogant. Now that someone had come to beg them, wouldn't they be looked down upon if they did not act appropriately? Tiger's Mane nodded and retreated to handle the matter. At this moment, King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had already been escorted in under the supervision of a few members of the First Guard. Along with them was the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Lengfeng Regiment, Wu Sheng. Wu Sheng could be considered to have started following Yang Chendong rather early. He had been by Yang Chendong's side ever since they were in the Yang residence in northern Ming's capital. Although they were both battalion commanders, there was still a difference in their relationship. This Wu Sheng belonged to the category that was closer to the 6th young master. For example, although in terms of official position, he was not as high as 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa, but in terms of personal friendship, there were some things that Luo Pa could not casually say, but Wu Sheng could. "Thank you for your hard work," Yang Chendong said with a smile when he saw Wu Sheng, who was wearing a camouflage uniform and had the insignia of a major. "Not at all." A silly smile appeared on Wu Sheng's face, but it quickly turned into a serious expression. The 6th young master could joke with him, but he did not have the right to joke with the 6th young master. Especially as the Yang clan system continued to grow, the distance between the two would only grow further and further. Yang Chendong was very satisfied with Wu Sheng's performance. He liked people who knew their limits when doing things, and only such people could be trusted. Those who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth when they came to power obviously would not have much of a future. When his gaze shifted from Wu Sheng to Li Li and Li Yuanlong, Yang Chendong could not help but chuckle. Yang Chendong did not know what King Li Li had been like in the past. However, Yang Chendong had personally seen what Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was like. But now, in comparison, he was no longer as high-spirited as he was that day. His hair was hanging upside down, falling messily on his face. Although his clothes still looked like high-end goods, they were wrinkled, especially with a few shoe prints on them. With one look, one could imagine what kind of treatment he had received. It could be said that at this moment, there was no trace of the Crown Prince's demeanor on Li Yuanlong. It was not strange for people who did not know him to treat him as a beggar. Yang Chendong chuckled emotionally, but in the ears of Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son pair, it was indeed a great mockery. The two immediately widened their eyes and looked like they couldn't wait to eat Yang Chendong. "Bastard, kneel down when you see the Duke of Loyalty." Beta Persei, who had been standing next to Yang Chendong, happened to see the unfriendly look in the eyes of the father and son and immediately roared. It was appropriate to say that it was a roar. Beta Persei's voice was very loud, and now that he was angry, his chi came out from his dantian. It was no different from a beast's howl. Just this shout scared Li Li and Li Yuanlong so much that they knelt on the ground. Of course, this was also due to the efforts of the members of the 1st Guard Squad behind them. In the eyes of the 1st Guard Squad, Beta Persei and Tiger's Mane often represented the 6th young master. The one who was hurt the most by this roar was Yang Chendong, who was sitting in front of him. Fortunately, the chi that had appeared in his body at some unknown time had greatly protected him. That was why he was only startled and not injured. But he could not help but rub his ears first, then turned back to glare at Beta Persei until he saw the other party smile a little embarrassedly. Then, he turned his head again and looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong. When the father and son glared at him just now, Yang Chendong didn't detect any killing intent from them. This could only prove that the two of them were really afraid. They just wanted to puff themselves up at their own cost. They just wanted to prove their existence and status. To be more specific, it was a bit of a show of strength but cowardice at heart. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong did not care about such little tricks. Not to mention that they were already prisoners, even if they still had their original identities, he would never be afraid. "Li Yuanlong, do you still remember our conversation that night?" Yang Chendong finally spoke after looking at the father and son with a scrutinizing gaze. "Yes. I remember." Li Yuanlong seemed to suddenly think of something, then a trace of confusion appeared in his eyes, and then his whole body could not help but tremble. That night, Yang Chendong once said to him that if the father and son were willing to take the initiative to surrender, although they would lose their power, they would still be safe for the rest of their lives. But if they did not surrender, then they could only choose death. At that time, these conditions were indeed difficult to accept in his ears. But now, the overall situation was set, and they had really become Yang Chendong's prisoners. How could they not be afraid when they thought of this matter? As if to prove what he said at the beginning, Yang Chendong suddenly swung his long arm, and 2 flashing golden throwing knives flew out, then landed at the feet of Li Li and Li Yuanlong. The position was only a fist away from their feet. Their eyes lit up. Other than the father and son, the other people in the hall looked at Yang Chendong with eyes full of admiration. Not for anything else, but just because of the beautiful throwing knife skill. This was something they could not do even if they were beaten to death. They could throw the throwing knife, but they would not throw it so far, a distance of 40 meters, and they would not throw it so accurately. Of course, if they knew that the person involved was not satisfied with this skill. Yang Chendong was still thinking in his heart that he was still not mature and skilled in using qi. He originally aimed at the feet of the other party. Thinking about it, if the 2 throwing knives landed less than an inch in front of the feet, what kind of situation would it be? In this way, Yang Chendong thought that he still had to work hard to cultivate. He believed that with the existence of qi, as long as he continued to work hard, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. Ignoring the admiring eyes of others, Yang Chendong looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son, and said in an emotionless voice, "Since you are the first country I destroyed, I will give you a chance. Only one of you can live, you can choose." What was cruel? Presumably, this was cruel. Only one of the father and son could live, or let them choose for themselves. Most likely, anyone would hesitate when faced with such a question. They would be conflicted, and they might even be unable to stop themselves from cursing. Fortunately, Li Li and Li Yuanlong were not ordinary people. One of them was the king of a country, the other was the crown prince of a country, the future king. How could they be measured by the standards of ordinary people? Just like now, the 2 of them only hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking a throwing knife each. Li Li was already more than 60 years old. After experiencing this kind of torment, his face looked very old. So when he took the throwing knife, he shook his head, then put the throwing knife on the ground and began to cry. Woo woo woo. It was hard to imagine what kind of feeling a 60-year-old man would give when he cried. It was hard to describe, but a sense of sadness involuntarily spread out. I've let you down. I wasn't able to leave you a good family business. Now that I'm over 60 years old, I've lived long enough. Come, kill me. This way, you can live for a few more years. I just hope that every year on this day, you won't forget to burn some joss paper for me. Li Li was like a child who realized that he had lost his way. At this moment, Li Li completely opened his heart and cried bitterly. Originally, he had already clenched the throwing knife in his hand and was ready to fight to the death with his father, but he did not expect to see this scene. At this moment, Li Yuanlong did not know what to do. He only hesitated for a moment, then called out loudly and hugged his father. Although in his heart, he hated his father for provoking such a strong enemy like the mercenaries, causing him to lose his hope of succeeding the throne. But no matter what, this was his father, right? Now, he was willing to die to help him live, just by giving him a hug. No matter how he looked at it, it was only right. Don't think that some people are overbearing and act high and mighty. Usually, he would kill people without batting an eyelid and take their lives as if it were child's play. But usually, such people were very afraid of death. This was because they didn't know what they would face after death. That feeling of the unknown terrified them. Especially after they were used to controlling everything, death was their taboo. In particular, the older they got, the more fearful they felt. This was why many kings were very wise when they were young, but when they were old, they would study things like longevity. They knew it was impossible, but they had to do it. Li Li didn't want to die, so the one to die was Li Yuanlong. So what if this person was his son? At least he survived, right? As for whether his actions would cause others to hate him, he didn't care. In his opinion, since Yang Chendong had set the rules, as long as they followed the rules, it would be fine. As for the result, Yang Chendong would definitely admit it. Otherwise, it would be a slap in the face in front of everyone. Those who truly wanted to do great things wouldn't do such a thing. Li Yuanlong glared at his father with unwillingness. In the end, because he had lost too much blood, he fell to the ground with a plop and died with his eyes closed. Seeing all of this, the people at the side, including Wan Chunqing, had a trace of hatred and confusion in their eyes. They suddenly looked down on their former king. On the other hand, Yang Chendong was just as Li Li had expected. He wasn't surprised at all. In fact, before Li Li was about to act, he had already felt it. Yes, he had indeed felt it. All of this was due to the qi in his body. It was that qi that told him that Li Li had killing intent, but Li Yuanlong didn't, so the result was already within his expectations. In fact, for Yang Chendong, he didn't care who lived or died. Just as Li Li thought, it was fine as long as they played within the rules of his game. Of course, he was more or less shocked that Li Yuanlong had personally killed his son. Perhaps this was the nature of an ambitious and ruthless person. Very good, Li Li, you win. From now on, no one will make things difficult for you. You can still live well. Of course, don't think about power and freedom. You will be sent to a very safe place. You won't have to worry about food and drink. If your former subordinates want to see you, they will be able to do so after they apply for permission. I only want to remind you of one thing. Don't think about unrealistic problems. Otherwise, no son will be willing to take the blame for you next time. After giving a definition to this matter and setting a rule for Li Li's life, Yang Chendong waved his hand. Then, Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu, and a few other guards came forward to take Li Li away. Li Yuanlong's corpse was also taken away. After dealing with the Li father and son, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Wan Chunqing. Hong Jin, listen to my orders. Yes, sir. Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop, looking very pious. I appoint Hong Jin as the general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. He will command 15,000 soldiers. Chen Di, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 10,000 soldiers. Wan Chunqing, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 5,000 soldiers. As soon as he opened his mouth, he appointed 3 people. As the first 2 people, Hong Jin and Chen Di, were naturally excited and happy. At least they would be able to live and have a certain amount of power. Compared to many of the ministers of Jiaoji, their outcome was the best. However, the last person to be named, Wan Chunqing, stood there without moving for a long time after hearing Yang Chendong call his name. What? You're not willing? Seeing that Wan Chunqing didn't say anything, Yang Chendong raised his voice as if he was questioning Wan Chunqing. This. I don't have to die. Why would you forgive me and give me such an important task? Wan Chunqing was confused. Obviously, he did not understand Yang Chendong's decision. He had originally thought that he was going to die for sure, and he had even mentally prepared himself for it. However, who would have thought that not only was he innocent, but he was also given great power? Because you have the ability. I'm interested in your ability. There are still some places in Jiaoji that are in chaos. I hope that you can step in and calm them down so that fewer people die. I think you can do it and you're willing to do it, right? Yang Chendong pointed out the reason why he wanted to put Wan Chunqing in an important position. Although Wan Chunqing did not contribute much, he did not do anything wrong either. It was his original identity that forced him to go against the Jiaoji mercenary army. There was no personal grudge between them. Furthermore, he was able to become the prime minister of Jiaoji. Even a formidable person like Lily approved of him. No one would believe that he did not have the ability. If he dared to put Lily in an important position, why wouldn't Yang Chendong do the same? Not to mention, Hong Jin and Chen Di were suppressing him from above, so there wouldn't be any problems. Of course, the main reason why Yang Chendong wanted to use Wan Chunqing was because he knew that Wan Chunqing was talented and capable. In the past, Jiaoji was his enemy. When he wanted to kill and destroy, he would not show any mercy. But now, this place had become his sphere of influence. Naturally, he had to change his mindset. How to quickly settle down and prosper here, and then use this place to influence other places and expand the influence and strength of the mercenary army was the most important thing. To achieve this, Hong Jin and Chen Di were not enough. On the other hand, Ruan Chunqing could do it as long as he worked hard. Ruan Chunqing could not immediately see through Yang Chendong's intentions, but he was still impressed by his magnanimity. Since ancient times, there was a saying that a gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Even if he did not care about this favor, he had to accept this task for the sake of the Ruan clan's descendants. Otherwise, if he angered Yang Chendong, not only would he die, but the Ruan clan would also suffer. Thud. Ruan Chunqing knelt on the ground. He did it willingly. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. Chunqing will do my best. Only death awaits. Good, get up. I don't want you to die. Speaking of which, if you become my subordinate, you should live a better life. I have the ability to give you that. Of course, if anyone still has other tricks up their sleeves, don't blame me for being merciless once it's discovered. Yang Chendong's face couldn't help but become serious when he said the last part. I hate it when people betray me. If anyone dares to do so, they will suffer a fate worse than death. We don't dare, Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Ruan Chunqing said in unison. Taking advantage of this situation, Yang Chendong nodded his head and handed the matter of pacifying the other parts of Jiaoji to the three of them. Presumably, with these 30,000 men and the influence of the mercenaries, there shouldn't be any resistance in Jiaoji. Chapter 536. As the three of them left, another young man was brought into the hall. As soon as the young man entered the hall, he knelt down in front of Yang Chendong and greeted him. The person who came was none other than one of the first students of the Yang Chendong Academy. He was also one of Yang Chendong's disciples, Chang Qianhao. The Chang family was a wealthy family. Not only was their family wealthy, but their businesses were spread all over the Jiangnan area. There were also some officials in the family who had a close relationship with the Southern Ming Empire. As the leader of the younger generation of the Chang family, Chang Qianhao had already shown himself in the family and had a certain status. However, he was not a satisfied person. Especially after he went to the capital of Baiming and saw the power of the immortal abode and sky beyond sky, he worshipped the person behind all of this, Yang Chendong. Later, when the Yang Family Academy enrolled students, he signed up and became one of its members. Later, because of his excellent performance in business, he became one of Yang Chendong's disciples. After graduation, he returned to the Chang family in Jiangnan and did a lot of things for Yang Chendong, making the Chang family more powerful in Jiangnan's business. Chang Qianhao was also regarded by the older generation of the Chang family as one of the most promising people to inherit the family business. This time, he was summoned to Jiaoji because Yang Chendong wanted to develop business here. The Chang family's influence in the Southern Ming Empire's business circle was not small. This was where he needed to rely heavily, which led to the current scene. Qianhao, your body has grown stronger. Not bad, get up. Looking at the disciple kneeling on the ground, his skin seemed to have become darker. Yang Chendong nodded with satisfaction and then pointed to a chair in front of him. He did not dare to refuse an elder's gift. Although Yang Chendong was only a few months older than Chang Qianhao, the idea of a teacher for a day, a father for life was very popular at that time and was the most orthodox existence. Chang Qianhao sat in front of Yang Chendong with a trembling look. Don't be nervous. I called you over this time because I have something for you to do. Teacher is planning to start a business with Jiaoji as the center. He will start selling some of the realm beyond heaven's products here and then sell them to the Southern Ming dynasty and the nearby countries. How about it? Do you have the confidence to do this well? Yang Chendong said with a smile. Even though Baiming already had a heavens beyond trading company, transportation in ancient times wasn't very developed. When some goods were shipped to Southern Ming, or even Jiaoji, the price would rise quite a bit due to transportation issues. This wasn't beneficial for the quick sale of some goods in Crimson City. That was why he had decided to build a second commercial center around Jiaoji. This way, not only would he be able to prosper Jiaoji and restore its prosperity, he would also be able to earn more money and increase the flow of goods. Why not? Chang Qianhao had already thought of the reason before he had come. As for people saying that Jiaoji was still Jiaoji and that Yang Chendong's words didn't necessarily have the final say, he didn't think too much about it. With his trust in his teacher, he naturally didn't need to worry about the safety of his teacher. As expected, when he arrived at Jiaoji, everything had changed. The originally huge country had now become Yang Chendong's territory. If this happened to anyone else, they would definitely be shocked. However, when it was related to Yang Chendong, Chang Qianhao felt that it couldn't be any simpler. If someone really went to the Yang Family Academy and listened to Yang Chendong's lectures, they would know that this young teacher really knew everything from astronomy to geography. It was as if there was nothing he didn't know and nothing he couldn't understand. It wasn't strange for someone like this to be able to do anything because he possessed such magic and ability. "Teacher, this student will definitely do his best and won't disappoint you," said Chang Qianhao excitedly. Although Yang Chendong hadn't mentioned what benefits he would give him from the start, sometimes it was best to not mention it. For example, when selling things to different places, there would always be a problem with the ratio, and there would always be a problem with the distributor. Yang Chendong didn't specify who would give him the benefits, so how this cake would be divided, wouldn't it all be up to him? This was an opportunity to indirectly strengthen the Chang family. As long as he was slightly biased towards the Chang family and those who were on good terms with the Chang family, wouldn't he have everything? Of course, it would only be limited to a little manipulation, and he couldn't go overboard. Moreover, the Chang family would have to pay the price as well. Otherwise, no one could imagine the consequences of angering his teacher. If that day really came, it would be hard to say whether the entire Chang family would still exist. The conversation with Chang Qianhao soon ended. After all, Yang Chendong had a lot of things to do. He only needed to point out a way to do business, and the people below should know how to do it. His main focus was still on dealing with major issues. What was a major issue? Of course, it was how to deal with the relationship between Southern Ming, Bai Ming, and the Min King. The reason why the Min King was placed in the same position as Southern Ming and Bai Ming. That was because Yang Chendong didn't mean to be enemies with the Min King. On the contrary, he had to find a way to balance these three forces as much as possible. Only in this way, they wouldn't point their spears at him, and he would have the opportunity to develop his own territory and do what he wanted to do. Beta Persei, prepare the meal. In the afternoon, I will meet with the envoys from Southern Ming. After all, they representing sect, so it wouldn't be good to neglect them too much. After dealing with these matters in the morning, Yang Chendong stretched his back and stood up. Compared to Yang Chendong's satisfaction, the imperial eunuch Kai Gu, who was entrusted by Ying Sek's Zhu Qizhen to come to Jiaoji to announce the edict, was not in the mood to eat or drink. Initially, he thought that he was here as a representative of Yingzong to mediate the war in Jiaoji with a transcendent status. Thinking about it, with the war in a stalemate, both sides had probably suffered heavy losses, but no one wanted to take a step back. At this time, his appearance could give them a way out, and he would definitely be welcomed by everyone. In fact, it would be reasonable for them to seek some benefits for the Southern Ming Empire. This was also the reason why his uncle Kai Zhong worked hard to get this job for him. Ying Sek's Zhu Qizhen was a person who remembered what he had eaten but not what he had beaten. Because of Wang Zhen, Tu Mu was defeated and he almost lost the throne. However, after establishing himself in Nanjing, he still reactivated the eunuch group. However, even though they were all eunuchs, their identities were different. For example, the eunuchs around Ying's sect had several factions. Other than Mao Mu, who mainly served Empress Qian, there were also Chao Jixiang, Qian Sengbao, and Kai Zhong. Regarding the emergence of these eunuch factions, Zhu Qizhen had always been looking for a way to balance them. He didn't want to let one faction become too big, but he also didn't want to let one faction be suppressed to the point where they couldn't survive. However, no matter what he did, it was difficult to balance a bowl of water. In comparison, Kai Zhong's faction was originally weak. Perhaps it was because Zhu Qizhen saw this point that he gave the task of announcing the edict to Kai Zhong's nephew, Kai Gu. Along the way, Kai Gu had been imagining what kind of identity he would have when he arrived in Jiaoji, and what kind of awe-inspiring appearance he would have. However, in reality, the closer he got to the land of Jiaoji, the more complicated his thoughts became. Along the way, all he heard was news of the defeat of the Jiaoji army. When he arrived at Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji, he heard about the battle at Shiyu City. The Jiaoji army had suffered a great defeat, and even the country's ruler had fled. It was beyond Kai Ji's expectations that the battle would come to an end in such a short time. As such, along the way from Hanoi to Shiyu City, most of the Jiaoji envoys who were following him had fled. Perhaps, they were afraid of being implicated. Others could leave, but Kai Gu couldn't. Otherwise, not only would he implicate his uncle, but he would also have nowhere to go. What awaited him was the pursuit of the Eastern faction guards and the embroidered uniform guards. Bracing himself, he finally arrived at Shiyu City. Before he even entered the city, he saw several Jingguan. There were the 5,000 Jiaoji Jingguan from before, as well as the 30,000 Jiaoji Jingguan after the battle. When he saw the huge Jingguan from afar, Kai Gu couldn't help but feel his legs go weak. His scalp went numb, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He knew that his mission this time wouldn't be easy to complete. Regardless of his feelings, Kai Gu still made his way to Shiyu City. Indeed, he was warmly received, and only then did he feel better. When he was informed that the Duke of Loyalty would meet him in the afternoon, he began to ponder about how he should speak and complete his mission. Before he could think of anything, another piece of news came, disrupting Kai Ji's calm mind. The king of Jiaoji and the crown prince had been captured by Yang Chendong. Not only that, the king of Jiaoji even killed his young son in front of everyone in order to survive. Naturally, Kai Gu wouldn't doubt the authenticity of this news. After all, the ones who spread this news were some of the old officials of Jiaoji, and it was said that they had witnessed it with their own eyes. If this news was true, then there was a problem. Jiaoji had already been destroyed. Wouldn't it be ridiculous for him to appear here as the mediator of the war? While he was in a daze, someone came to see him, saying that the Duke of Loyalty wanted to meet him. With incomparable nervousness, Kai Gu came to a courtyard and saw the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty playing with goldfish beside a pond in the garden. Chapter 537. Southern Ming Special Envoy Kai Gu greets the Duke of Loyalty. When they were still 3 feet away, Kai Gu stopped under the signal of the guard on the side and said, "Okay. Let him come over." Yang Chendong didn't turn his head, but his voice was clearly heard. Not to mention that a small Kai Gu didn't have the ability to do anything to him. Even if he had such ability, his ki would become stronger and stronger. Why should he be afraid of him? "Go over, but be careful." Peng Yu, who was guarding here, looked at Kai Gu coldly and reminded him coldly. Another team member standing on the side, Ba Daojiang, casually glanced over here, then turned around and began to observe the surrounding movements. He felt that it was interesting for his comrade Peng Yu to scare people like this, but he knew that his duty was still to guard the safety of this place. Although Shiyu City was occupied by the mercenaries, it didn't mean that it was safe here. In the past few days, there were more than a dozen assassination attempts aimed at the 6th young master. Although they were all daunting but not dangerous, this didn't mean that they could be careless. As for Kai Gu, in the face of Peng Yu's reminder, he had to show a flattering smile, then walked over to Yang Chendong's side. This time, he didn't need anyone to remind him. When he was 3 meters away, he took the initiative to stand there. At this time, Yang Chendong just finished sprinkling the fish food in his hand, then turned around, walked to the pavilion on the side, and sat down. He pointed at Kai Gu and said, "You also sit down. After all, you represent the emperor, you can't lose your identity." Yang Chendong had to add the last sentence, otherwise, Kai Gu wouldn't have the courage to sit down. If this was the case, once the news spread out, it was inevitable that people would say that he didn't respect the Southern Ming emperor. He wouldn't take such a blame. Seeing that Yang Chendong's attitude was good, Kai Gu breathed a sigh of relief, then sat down opposite him. Say it, what are you here for? After waiting for Kai Gu to sit down, Yang Chendong asked, then looked at Kai Gu with interest. This kind of gaze was very similar to looking at animals in the zoo. Kai Gu also felt like he was being watched. He really didn't like this side of him and really wanted to say something. However, after thinking about it, he still held it in. It wasn't for any other reason than the fact that the person sitting across from him was too powerful. It was far beyond what he could resist, and it would only complicate matters. Since his identity was a little too weak, then he should just say whatever he wanted to say and focus on completing the mission. As for the embarrassment, it was better not to fuss about it. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, this one is here on the Emperor's orders to urge the mercenaries to stop fighting with Jiaoji. I just didn't expect. Without waiting for Kai Gu to continue, Yang Chendong interrupted, you didn't expect the war to end so quickly, did you? Yes. Kai Gu nodded, and then said according to what he thought at noon, the mercenaries led by Duke of Loyalty and Courage are indeed very powerful. To be able to wipe out the main force of the Jiaoji army so quickly, this is something that no one expected. Kai Gu first praised Yang Chendong and the mercenaries' strength, but then his expression changed slightly as he shook his head and said, it's just that killing people is just a small matter. After all, King Li is the king of An and personally conferred by the Great Ming. If the Duke of Loyalty and Courage killed him just like that, how would others look at our emperor? Why don't we stop the war and let King Li compensate the mercenaries with some gold and silver, so that they can learn a lesson? Looking at Kai Ji's face, Yang Chendong really wanted to spit on Kai Ji's face and say no. However, since it was a negotiation, he had to know what the other party wanted. As such, he did not immediately get angry and pretended to listen. He nodded and said, please continue. Yang Chendong didn't object, which made Kai Gu happy in his heart. When he spoke again, his face had a little more confidence. If Jiaoji can stop the war, this is naturally something that the emperor and all of the great Ming people want to see. However, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage can lead the army up north and wipe out the Min King's rebel army, returning peace to the southern Ming, I'm afraid that Duke of Loyalty and Courage will be recorded in the history books. This is something that will go down in history. Of course, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage feels that it is difficult, that is not a problem. As long as you support the southern Ming with tens of millions of silver to train the new army, the effect will be the same. That's right, this silver can be considered a loan from the southern Ming to Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In order to express his gratitude to Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the emperor will definitely agree to give you the title of prince. In the future, as long as Biming agrees, this matter can be accomplished. As such, I'm afraid that the next time I see Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I will have to address you as prince. Just thinking about it makes others envious, he. Kai Gu was laughing, and Yang Chendong was also laughing after hearing this. They wanted him to withdraw his troops, and they also wanted him to fork out money. What he would get in return was an empty title of a prince. Moreover, this title still required the approval of the Northern Ming Empire. In the end, it was tantamount to not having any promises. He really did not know if there was something wrong with Kai Ji's head or if Zhu Qizhen was treating him like a 3-year-old child. Did he really think that he would give him whatever he wanted just by casually coaxing and saying a few nice words? It was truly laughable. He. Both of them were laughing, but as they laughed, Kai Gu could not laugh anymore. This was because he found that Yang Chendong was sneering, and there was a trace of anger in his eyes. A murderous aura unconsciously wrapped around his body, as if he was being stared at by a wild beast. It made it difficult for him to breathe. Cold sweat unknowingly began to flow from his forehead. It must be said that Kai Gu was also a person who knew martial arts. Normally, it would be difficult for 3 to 5 men to get close to him. If he had a long sword, he could even fight against 7 or 8 people. However, he did not know why, but when facing Yang Chendong, he found that he did not even have the strength to raise his arm. Did Emperor Yingzong say these words? After an unknown amount of time, Yang Chendong finally spoke again. When he spoke, the pressure suddenly decreased by a lot. At least, Kai-gu felt that it was not so difficult to breathe. Just now, he really felt that if he continued, he was afraid that even breathing would be a problem. That was equivalent to walking through the gates of hell. He definitely did not want to experience that kind of feeling a second time. Of course, this was also Yang Chendong's intention. Just now, he deliberately mobilized the qi in his body in order to try and see how much pressure it could bring to Kai-gu. Now, it seemed that he was very satisfied with the result. One must know that he only used less than 70% of his qi to make the other party unable to move. It could be imagined that if he used his full strength, the other party would only be lying on the ground now. This was only the effect of targeting a single person. If he wanted to deal with a group of people, the effect would be greatly reduced. Fortunately, he could feel that the qi in his body had been growing stronger ever since it appeared out of nowhere. He believed that as long as he guided it well, it would only become more and more powerful in the future. Given enough time, it shouldn't be a problem for him to deal with a group of people. This is the emperor's intention. Even though he felt immense pressure, Kai-gu did not forget the rules. As he spoke, he even cupped his hands in the air to show his respect to the emperor. Then, do you think that there is any meaning in saying all this now? Of course, Yang Chendong knew that this was Ingzong's intention. Otherwise, how would a small eunuch like him dare to do such a thing on his own? However, he still asked the question because he wanted to put the pressure on Kai-gu. Under the pressure, the might of the qi was naturally displayed. Kai-gu shook his head. To be honest, I'm afraid that no one would expect the mercenary army to be so powerful that the Duke of Loyalty could pacify the Jiaoji army in such a short time. Looking at it this way, these requests are somewhat inappropriate. Kai-gu also knew that when he said those words, he was going against the emperor's orders. But there was no other way. The situation was stronger than the person, not to mention that Yang Chendong was sitting opposite him. After what happened just now, he was really afraid that if he said something wrong, Yang Chendong would directly kill him. Even though killing the emperor's envoy was a huge matter, and it was normal for people to view it as a rebellion, it was even more normal for one's entire family to be executed. However, this also depended on who it was. With Yang Chendong and the powerful mercenaries behind him, he did not believe that Emperor Ingzong would be willing to offend people and avenge him for an imperfect person like him. Even if he did avenge him, so what? His own people were already dead, so there was no point in saying those things, right? Seeing that Kai-gu was still sensible, Yang Chendong nodded his head in satisfaction. He also intentionally retracted his aura so that Kai-gu would not feel so pressured. Then, he said, "It's impossible to retreat from Jiaoji. Let's put it this way, when the war has reached this stage, it's no longer up to me to decide. The leader of the mercenary army has already started to interfere. He has set his sights on Jiaoji and wants to take it for himself. Of course, if Emperor Ingzong is unhappy, he can send troops to fight. I won't object to this." After deciding on the direction of the formation, Yang Chendong said, "Maybe you don't know, but if it wasn't for me, the mercenary army's target would not be Jiaoji, but the entire Great Ming dynasty. You can also see how powerful the mercenary army is. They have such strength now." When he heard Yang Chendong say that the mercenary army's target was the Great Ming dynasty, Kai-gu was indeed a little afraid. If it was the Great Ming dynasty a few years ago, which was the Great Ming dynasty that had not experienced the changes of the earth and wood, it could still be said that they could wrestle with the mercenary army. After all, they did not have anything else, but they had a large territory and a large population. But now? The Great Ming dynasty was divided into north and south, and now there was the addition of Prince Min's forces. Emperor Ingzong himself was in a terrible fix. If the mercenary army joined in, the consequences could be imagined. Chapter 538. Thinking about the current situation of the Southern Ming Empire, Kai-gu couldn't help but feel short of breath. At this point, the initiative was completely in Yang Chendong's hands. Seeing that Kai-gu didn't speak anymore and sighed as if he had accepted his fate, Yang Chendong smiled in his heart. Some people were like this, always thinking that they were the emperor and everyone should listen to them. But once they met a tough opponent, their attitude would immediately change. Perhaps this was the human instinct to bully the weak and fear the strong. However, Yang Qindong wouldn't pity Ying Zong because he already saw that such a person wouldn't be able to lead the Han people to the peak of the world. Since others couldn't do it, then he would leave everything to him. Yang Qindong already had an idea in his heart. When he talked about some things, his tone naturally wouldn't be polite. Speaking of the Battle of Jiaoji, it isn't over yet. The captured King Li has already said that the person who sent people to assassinate me was his subordinate, Fan Yuhai. This time, this person escaped and went to the Lansang Kingdom. If I don't catch this person, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. Therefore, the mercenaries will probably send troops to the Lansang Kingdom. Of course, unless they are willing to send Fan Yuhai's head. If they want to cover it up, there will be a huge battle. Of course, this matter shouldn't have anything to do with the Southern Ming Empire. This duke is telling you this because I hope that when you meet the emperor, you can tell him what the mercenaries are going to do next. Just let him know in his heart what to do next. This was clearly reminding Kai Ge that not only would the mercenaries not listen to Ying Zong's orders, but they would also continue to fight. As for when the fight would end, it was hard to say. Just like now, they sent troops to the Lansang Kingdom with the excuse of finding the culprit, Fan Yuhai. Who knew what kind of excuse they would use next time? After all, they could always find a reason to do so. In other words, if they were willing, the mercenary army could continue to expand endlessly until one day, when their strength grew, they might even come to the great Ming Empire to cause trouble. He thought that if the mercenary army really cleaned up these small countries one by one, and finally integrated their strength, then at that time, there would be no difference between them and the great Ming Empire. Then, wouldn't the great Ming Empire be in danger? Kai Ge's expression was constantly changing as he hurriedly said, "Loyal Duke, don't be anxious. Since Fan Yuhai wants to make a move on Loyal Duke, he is courting death. Dealing with him is something that should be done. However, every grievance had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. They would just have to look for whoever was responsible for it." The Lansang Kingdom has always followed the lead of the great Ming Empire. At the same time, they are also one of the vassal states of our great Ming Empire. I believe that as long as we reason with them and move them emotionally, they will definitely not cover up the existence of Fan Yuhai. Please give them some time to deal with this matter properly. I can try my best to help with this. After all, I am also a citizen of the great Ming dynasty. However, you should also know that we cannot delay for too long. If we delay for too long, once the leader of the mercenary army gets angry, I don't know what will happen. Yang Qindong nodded. He originally didn't have the intention to make a move on the Lansang Kingdom immediately. It wasn't that he didn't have sufficient military strength, but if he didn't consolidate his rear, it would be easy for problems to arise. Right now, he needed to focus on how to turn Jiaoji into his rear base. Only after this base was stabilized, then he would proceed to the next step of expansion. Of course, if someone wanted to show off like a clown, then he wouldn't hold back. Naturally, other people wouldn't be able to see his thoughts, so he needed to use this opportunity to pressure the Southern Ming Empire and Ying Zong. At the same time, it was also a method to numb the Southern Ming Empire. He wanted to create a misconception that the strength of the mercenary army was limited. It was already very difficult for them to conquer Jiaoji, let alone the Lansang Kingdom. This way, the Southern Ming Empire might look down on the mercenary army, and this would create more time for him to develop. The matter regarding Jiaoji was settled just like that. In short, he couldn't return the money, and he believed that Ying Zong would accept this fact. However, there was nothing he could do even if Ying Zong didn't accept it. Would he really bring his troops over? Putting aside whether he had the strength to do so, if he really dared to do so, Min King and Bai Ming would definitely use this opportunity to deal with him. By then, the Southern Ming Empire could only become history and disappear from the stage. After settling the matter of Jiaoji, Yang Qindong brought up the matter of Ying Zong wanting to borrow money. Envoy Kai, it's not impossible for the Southern Ming Empire to borrow money, but there are two conditions. Kai Gu originally thought that with Yang Chendong's domineering attitude, he wouldn't be able to get the money. Now that he suddenly heard this, Kai Gu perked up. Please speak, Duke of Loyalty. First, the Yang family bank has to enter the Southern Ming Empire and set up branches in some of the bigger cities. Only then can we better allocate the money and work for the Southern Ming Empire. Second, even if we borrow money with collateral, we don't know what the Southern Ming Empire will be willing to pay. If we don't have anything, this matter won't be easy to handle. Don't you think so? Yang Chendong looked at Kai Gu with a deadpan expression, as if he was doing business. As for the first condition, Kai Gu really couldn't say anything about the Yang family bank entering the Southern Ming Empire. After all, if you wanted to ask someone for help, then it was normal for their bank to enter your territory. Not to mention, it was under the guise of working for the Southern Ming Empire, so there was even less reason to reject it. As for the second condition, Kai Gu really didn't think about it. In his opinion, the emperor was giving you face by asking you to borrow money. Why would he ask for collateral? Of course, he wouldn't say such thoughts in front of Yang Chendong. Who knew if it would anger him? The feeling of being unable to breathe had not completely subsided, and he didn't want to feel it again. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Kai Gu asked, then I don't know what kind of collateral the Southern Ming Empire needs to pay if they want to get the money? What kind of collateral do you have? Yang Chendong didn't fall into the other party's trap. Instead, he held the initiative and asked back. Originally, Kai Gu wanted to wait for Yang Chendong to speak first and see what the other party liked. This way, he could bargain properly. However, he didn't expect that the other party would kick the question back to him. Instead, it made him fall into deep thought. Speaking of which, the matter of borrowing money with collateral was a common occurrence in the Ming Empire. Things like fields, houses, antiques from home, and women's jewelry were all common collateral. Even pawnshops were willing to accept these things in exchange for money to give to others. However, this time, the Southern Ming Empire didn't need tens of thousands of silver, but tens of millions of silver. In the face of such a large amount, ordinary items naturally wouldn't be enough. This made things difficult for Kai Gu. He really didn't know what to do. Naturally, Kai Gu was just a mouthpiece. He didn't have the right to decide how this matter would develop. In the end, it would still be reported to Emperor Ing. What he needed now was to figure out what could satisfy Yang Chendong and make him lend money to the Southern Ming Empire. Unable to think of a reason, Kai Gu showed a humble appearance and looked at Yang Chendong. He said, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, don't tease me. We really don't understand these things. You just need to say something, and I will naturally report it to the Emperor. He will be wise and make the final decision. Originally, he wanted to keep Kai Gu in suspense, but seeing that Kai Gu was really not good at this, Yang Chendong had to dispel the idea of letting the other party guess. He said, to be honest, there is indeed nothing in the Southern Ming Empire that the mercenary leader would like. Min Wang and Bai Ming are eyeing covetously from the side. Even if you are willing to give us land, I think the mercenary leader may not agree. Moreover, you don't want the mercenaries to intervene in the internal affairs of the great Ming Empire. Hee hee. Kai Gu smiled awkwardly. What a joke. Land was the foundation of a country. Even if the mercenaries wanted it, Zhu Qizhen wouldn't give it to them. Besides, the Southern Ming Empire was already chaotic enough. If the mercenaries were to intervene at this time, wouldn't it be even more chaotic? Looking at Kai Ji's obviously fawning smile, Yang Chendong knew that he had spoken the other party's mind. He continued, this time, the amount of money that Ing Zong needs is really too much. If it's converted into antiques and similar items, it would probably be an astronomical figure. You can't afford it. Yes. Kai Gu nodded and said, the emperor is very generous to us servants. Usually, he would reward us with a lot of things. Now that there are years of wars, the national treasury is already empty. Yang Chendong nodded to show that he understood. He hesitated and said, since the land is useless and there are no antiques, then I really don't know what is valuable. I'm afraid this matter is not easy to handle. Yang Chendong revealed an awkward expression and even had the intention of retreating. Kai Ge saw all of this and couldn't help but feel his heart tighten. This time, he was ordered to come here. The matter of the Jiaoji armistice had already failed. If he couldn't handle the matter of the silver, he could imagine what would be waiting for him when he returned to Nanjing. At this moment, he was no longer thinking about meritorious service. He was thinking about how to deal with this matter. The best result was that he didn't do anything. Therefore, he absolutely couldn't let any accidents happen to the silver tails. He immediately said to Yang Chendong with a bitter face, "Please don't, Duke Zhongdan. No matter what, our great Ming dynasty is still a powerful country. We have a large territory and a large population. It's just a few tens of millions of taels of silver. As long as the wind is calm and the world is peaceful, it won't be long before we can earn these taels of silver." Chapter 539. Yang Chendong seemed to have suddenly thought of something and seemed to have been enlightened. He looked at Kai Ge and said, "That's right. Just now, Emissary Kai's words did indeed remind me of something. The southern Ming Empire is vast and has a large population. Perhaps we can think of something from there." "Oh, is there any solution?" Seeing that the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better, Kai Ge asked with glowing eyes. Yang Chendong did not immediately say the answer. Instead, he went silent for a while before muttering to himself, "The so-called vast land and abundant resources are true. However, it is a pity that those things cannot be moved or moved. The southern Ming Empire also does not want the mercenaries to interfere with the matters there. Thus, this problem can be eliminated. As for the large population, this duke recalled what the mercenary leader said a while ago. He said that if we want to build a base for the mercenaries in Jiaoji, we will need a large number of people. It is clear that after the war, too many people died in Jiaoji. The population is already showing signs of negative growth. If the southern Ming Empire can provide some people, perhaps we can borrow some money." "Provide people?" Kai Ge was confused by Yang Chendong's words. His face was filled with confusion. "Yes, provide people." Yang Chendong seemed to have made up his mind as he said, "Nowadays, the southern Ming Empire needs money to train the new army. However, money doesn't just fall from the sky. It's impossible for us to not have to pay anything and just talk about money without paying anything. On the surface, it seems that this duke is in charge of the Yang family bank. However, you should be able to guess that the mastermind behind all of this is the mercenary leader. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the goods that are selling everywhere are all produced by the mercenaries. I am just putting on an act and helping out a little." "Yes, yes." Kai Ge nodded his head continuously. Regarding the Yang family bank, the immortal abode in Baiming's capital, and the sky beyond heaven, the outside world had already come to a conclusion. They also believed that these achievements had nothing to do with Yang Chendong. After all, he was so young and the Yang family's background was so clean. How could so many good things suddenly appear in the world? There was only one explanation. There was someone else behind this, and this person was most likely the mysterious mercenary. Now that Yang Chendong had explained himself, the result was the same as everyone else's guess. It was no wonder that Kai Ge kept nodding at this time to express his agreement. Seeing that Kai Ge agreed with him, Yang Chendong knew that the matter was almost done. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, "Most of the money in the Yang family's bank is from mercenaries. If you want to borrow money from them, you will have to get their permission. In other words, you need to give them something that will satisfy them. If that's the case, the only thing you can offer is your large population. How about this? There's no need for any collateral. The southern Ming Empire will provide the manpower, and will provide the money. Let's just do the transaction." "Trading people? But I don't know what the rules are." Kai Ge was a little confused by Yang Chendong's words, and his face was in a state of confusion. It must be said that there were indeed cases of human trafficking among the people. However, it was mostly due to the lack of servants in large families. Only then would they occasionally buy some. It was normal to say a dozen more, or a few less. The amount of money traded was also very limited. It could be as small as a few silver taels, or as large as a few hundred silver taels. But this time, the Southern Ming Empire needed tens of millions of silver taels. How many people would they need to buy? Seeing Kai Ge's doubts, Yang Chendong explained, human trafficking has been going on since ancient times. I don't think there's a need for me to say anything about it. The only problem with this transaction is that the Southern Ming Empire needs too much money. Naturally, the amount of people needed to be traded must be large. How about this? I will make the decision for the leader of the mercenaries, my brother. We will use 20 silver taels to buy a woman from our great Ming Empire. Children under 10 years old will be 15 silver taels. Elders over 50 years old will be 5 silver taels. Males between 14 to 40 years old will be 50 silver taels per person. As for how many people the Southern Ming Empire can provide, the mercenaries will pay the same amount of money. How about it? After beating around the bush for a long time, Yang Chendong finally brought up the matter of him needing a large number of people in a very shady manner. The reason why he didn't bring up this matter at the start was because he was afraid that Kai Gu would have other ideas. Like now, when the other party was at his wit's end, bringing up this kind of exchange condition would be more acceptable. As expected, Kai Gu didn't think too much about it. On the contrary, he began to calculate the cost of this human trafficking transaction in his mind. Using 20 silver taels for a woman as an example, this kind of price wasn't considered very generous. After all, when some large families wanted to buy maidservants, they would often offer a higher price than this. However, the mercenaries wanted a large number of people. They weren't picky, especially in terms of appearance. This wasn't something that those large families could compare to. Since a woman was 20 silver taels, 10 of them would be 200 silver taels, 100 would be 2,000 silver taels, then what about 10,000? What about 100,000? Wouldn't that be 2 million taels? In addition to the elderly and children, 100,000 would be another 2 million taels. The existence of these people wouldn't be of much use to the great Ming Empire. On the contrary, their existence was mostly a waste of food. If these people could be thrown out, then wouldn't the Southern Ming Empire be able to save a lot of resources? Not to mention, a young man would be worth 50 silver taels. 100,000 people would be a total of 5 million taels. Speaking of which, what the Southern Ming Empire had the most right now was naturally the population. Especially with the Min King's rebellion, many refugees from Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were heading towards Nanjing. On the way here, Kai Gu saw countless refugees. With a rough estimate, the population was at least 1 to 2 million. If all these people were traded to the mercenaries, how much would it be worth? Wouldn't the money for the training of the new army be easily gathered? Not to mention that the mission would be completed, it would also reduce the pressure on the Southern Ming Empire. Wasn't this killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Presumably, after the mission was completed, the emperor would definitely look at him in a new light. The more he thought about it, the more excited Kai Ge's heart became. When he looked at Yang Chendong, there was a burning feeling in his eyes. Duke Zhongdan, I wonder if there is a limit to this transaction? There is no limit. It depends on how much money you need and how many people you can provide. Of course, there's one thing that needs to be said, and that is that we won't force you to buy them. You shouldn't force us to sell them to you either. If you force them and they try to escape or commit suicide on the way here, then we won't take the blame. Those people's bodies still have to be sent back, and the money has to be returned. Otherwise, if we anger the mercenaries, it won't be good for anyone. Yang Chendong had to make things clear. He understood the way the Southern Ming Empire did things. In order to achieve their goal, they would do anything. If they really sent some weak and sick people to his side and kept all the good seedlings, then who knew how many families would be broken up? Under such circumstances, would the Han people who were traded be able to stay and work at his side with peace of mind? If that was the case, it would take a lot of energy to do the ideological work of these people every day. In order to prevent such a thing from happening, some ugly things must be said first. Of course, our Southern Ming Empire won't do such a despicable thing. Kai Ge quickly waved his hand, although he did have such an idea. In fact, similar things would happen in the process of trading people, but it really couldn't be done too much. Otherwise, angering the mercenaries really wouldn't be beneficial. That's good. Since Envoy Kai knows how to handle this matter, then I won't say anything more. This is the matter. You can go back and reply to the emperor. If you agree, the Yang family bank will first enter Nanjing City, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jiangning Prefecture, then the trade will be carried out there. In the end, all the people will be transported to the Songjiang Prefecture's dock. There will be mercenaries there to accept the people. You can take the silver from the Yang family bank in the 3 places through the bills issued by them. After Yang Chendong gave the method and process of the trade, he made a request. These 3 newly opened Yang family bank, I need my 4th brother to manage. I know that he should be in Nanjing's capital now. It should be easy to find him. His 4th brother was Yang Chendong. Previously, Zhu Qizhen wanted to use this person to threaten Yang Chendong. But now that everyone was cooperating, the so-called threat no longer existed. With Kai Ge's identity, he naturally knew about Yang. Before he came, the emperor had ordered that if the Duke of Loyal Courage asked about this matter, he had to explain it well. He had to say that he liked Yang's ability and wanted him to go to the capital to be an official. In short, this matter could not cause displeasure between both sides. Now that Yang Chendong did not delve into what was going on, he naturally would not deliberately mention this matter. He immediately nodded, indicating that there was no problem. Yang Chendong only mentioned the matter of his 4th brother. He believed that with Kai Ge's intelligence, he would know how to reply to Zhu Qizhen. As for the matter of him wanting to be conferred the title of king, he did not mention it again. Now was not the time to force him. It was better to get a large number of people first. As for the other matters, he believed that when the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. The meeting between the 2 sides went smoothly. Kai Ge was also very satisfied. After he said what he needed to say, he stood up and bid farewell. Now that the war in Jianghu was over, but it seemed that the mercenaries did not have any intention of letting go. They still wanted to use the Lansang kingdom to attack. He needed to report this matter to Yingzong and make a decision as soon as possible. There was also the matter of the population trade. After all, if he got the silver first, he could train the new army first. The South Ming Kingdom would be able to reach the moment of strength earlier. Chapter 540. Kai Ge, who knew that there was no time to lose, packed up his luggage after leaving Yang Chendong's residence. In less than half an hour, he left Shiyu City and went straight back to Nanjing. Tiger's man reported the news of Kai Ge's departure to Yang Chendong, and then said with some worry, "Young master, do you think the Southern Ming Empire will agree to the human trade?" "They will, they have no choice now. Besides, there are wars everywhere, and now there are many refugees. They are still worried about how to solve this matter. We have given them such a gap, they will definitely take advantage of it," Yang Chendong said confidently. It was no wonder that he would be so confident. At that time, the idea of people-oriented did not penetrate deep into people's hearts, and no emperor would really pay much attention to it. It was nothing more than when there was no conscription, there would be a shortage of people. As for normal times, there wouldn't be so many people thinking about it. Moreover, the Great Ming Empire had just experienced its heyday, and the population was more than 60 million. This time, it was just a transaction of 100,000 people, it was really not a big deal. Inform everyone that the Yang family bank is ready to enter Nanjing, Songjiang, and Jiangning. In addition, inform Qiqian City to prepare enough silver. If there is not enough silver when the transaction is done, it will be a joke. Yang Chendong gave an order to Tiger's man. The bank was newly established, and the silver reserves were naturally needed. However, relying on the Biming family bank was obviously not enough to support the overall situation. Fortunately, Qiqian City had already accumulated a lot of gold and silver. Not to mention how much profit the Navy could make from controlling this sea area, the advanced products produced by the factories were in short supply once they were shipped out, and they could all be sold at a high price. How could there be a shortage of silver? Tiger's man left, leaving Yang Qindong standing in the yard with an indifferent expression. This human trade was originally part of his plan, but he hadn't figured out how to do it. Kai Ge's appearance gave him a chance to do it openly. It could be imagined that once there were enough Han people, the road of expansion could continue. Otherwise, they could only fight for the country and not defend it. This kind of expansion would lose its meaning. Of course, it would take some time for the human trafficking to be completed. What he needed to do now was to settle the matter in Jiaoji. How to stabilize the hearts of the people and how to make this place a bridgehead for the mercenaries to attack and retreat was the focus of the recent work. Call Kong Jia and Song Jia here. Yang Qindong thought about the importance of talents, so he thought of the two political commissars. Yes. Beta Persei responded and turned to leave. Only Yang Qindong's figure was left in the courtyard, standing between heaven and earth. With the arrival of the mercenaries and 45,000 educated youths, the situation in Shiyu City had undergone earth-shattering changes. The streets were much cleaner than usual. There were more shops in the city that could be freely traded. The granaries in the city were also completely opened, allowing the people to trade freely. There were many more patrolling soldiers on the streets to ensure the stability of law and order. At the same time, there were also some criminals who wanted to fish in troubled waters, so that the safety of the people could be better maintained. To be able to restore the city that was originally damaged by the war, especially the destruction caused by the mortar shells, in such a short period of time, it was naturally beneficial to the joint efforts of everyone. Among them, the two political commissars who were in charge of political work were especially important. Under Yang Qindong's request, the political workers not only needed to be able to stabilize the morale of the army during wartime, but also needed to display their unique abilities in the city's construction. In this regard, Kong Jia and Song Jia did very well. Under their command and leadership, the political workers at all levels in the army displayed their abilities. Shiyu City could be said to be changing every day. Just when the two were busy, a member of the second guard squad found the two political commissars and said that the sixth young master wanted to see them. The members of the guard squad had long been in the eyes of the officers at all levels, so they naturally recognized them. Seeing the person coming, the two political commissars did not say anything. After handing over the matters at hand, they followed the person to the temporary palace in the city. In the same courtyard, Yang Qindong had some fruits and tea on the table in front of him. Seeing the two political commissars coming over under the lead of Beta Persei, Yang Qindong smiled and waved at them. Come, sit here. Kong Jia and Song Jia were somewhat flattered and hurriedly stepped forward, then each found a seat and sat down. The Jiaoji kingdom was destroyed so quickly. Not to mention others, even the mercenary officers did not expect it. Because of this, Yang Qindong was once again a legend. While his glorious image was deeply rooted in people's hearts, it also made people look up to him even more. Sensing the nervousness of the two political commissars, Yang Qindong laughed and said, "Relax, you don't have to be so nervous here. This time, I called you over because I know you've worked hard. Let's relax and have a casual chat." Kong Jia and Song Jia did not really think that the sixth young master called them over for a chat. The two of them sat there and looked at each other, then said in unison, "Sixth young master, if you have anything to say, just say the word." Okay. Seeing that the two political commissars knew that he had something to say to them, Yang Qindong smiled, then got up and poured a cup of tea for each of them. His attitude made the two of them stand up immediately. To be able to have the sixth young master pour tea for them, this treatment was too good. The two of them felt uneasy. Fortunately, Yang Qindong quickly explained the reason for calling them over. The two of you have worked hard during this period of time, and your work has been very effective. However, even though we have conquered Jiaoji, this is only the first step. How to govern this place and let the people here get used to our governance is the most important thing. How about it? Have the two of you ever thought of quitting the military and staying here to govern? Yang Chendong chuckled. He was ready to appoint generals. People say that it is easier to conquer a country than to defend it. The current Jiaoji was facing such a problem. It was impossible for the mercenaries to stay here for too long. They had too many things to do. Therefore, in the future, this place would have to be independent. Even though the Jiaoji mercenaries and the natives of Jiaoji like Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Wan Chunqing were in charge, Yang Chendong wouldn't be at ease if he didn't leave his own people behind. The reason he called the two of them over was obviously to choose one of them and leave one of them behind to govern Jiaoji. Yang Chendong had quite a number of generals under his command. After training and systematic learning, many of them had the ability to lead an army and fight on their own. However, in comparison, he had enough generals, but not enough civil officials. There were even fewer civil officials who could govern a place. After much consideration, Yang Chendong set his sights on the two political commissars, Kong Jia and Song Zhe. After a period of observation, the performance of these two people was very good, so Yang Chendong could rest assured and entrust them with heavy responsibilities. In fact, he could have ordered one of them to stay behind, but he didn't do so. He wanted to see what they wanted to do. After all, nothing forcibly done was worth it. The two of them didn't expect the sixth young master to call them over for this. Caught off guard, the two of them hesitated. As the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, it was rare for him to lead an army alone. However, he was still one of the commanding officers of the 1st Regiment. Furthermore, he had such a powerful mercenary army. When he fought a battle, it was truly a pleasure to him. Moreover, with such a modern army under his command, he would be able to contribute a lot to the war. If they were to withdraw from the army now, it would be equivalent to giving away a lot of their contributions. This made them somewhat reluctant. Besides, they could tell that the destruction of Jiaoji was only the result of the mercenary army's initial efforts. There would be many more such incidents in the future. If they stayed behind in Jiaoji now, would they still be able to climb to a higher position in the future? Everyone has their own selfish motives, but they are also ambitious. If they stayed in Jiaoji, it would be equivalent to stopping their progress. It was no wonder they were in such a difficult position. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Chendong saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He was waiting for the two of them to make their own decisions. If they didn't want to withdraw from the army, he wouldn't force them to do anything. He would continue to look for suitable candidates. However, the two of them had a lower status in his heart. After all, they didn't see the big picture and couldn't see the big picture. Such an officer's future was limited. Time passed by slowly. After Yang Chendong drank 2 cups of tea, Kong Jia and Song Zhe finally came to a decision. After looking at each other, they spoke at the same time. 6th young master, I am willing to stay. Yang Chendong didn't expect the two of them to speak at the same time. Of course, he was very satisfied. Good, good. It's rare for you to see the big picture. Since that's the case. Yang Chendong's gaze lingered between Kong Jia and Song Zhe. He looked at Kong Jia and Song Zhe and said, Song Zhe will stay. Other than the 30,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, I will leave you with a platoon of Leng Feng and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. Also, if you have any other requests, feel free to state them. Choosing Song Zhe over Kong Jia was naturally because the former was only a political commissar of the auxiliary army. Compared to political work, Kong Jia was obviously better. Therefore, Yang Chendong had long wanted Song Zhe to stay in the company. Since Kong Jia had taken the initiative to ask for it, he decided to make the decision. Chapter 541. It was reasonable that Song Zhe was willing to stay. He was only the political commissar of the auxiliary division. Even though he was doing a good job, he still needed some free time to be promoted to political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment. Since there was no room for him to rise in the military, he might as well take up a position in the local government first. The sixth young master was the one who suggested this. Song Zhe was sure that the other party would take note of his tactfulness. If there were any good opportunities in the future, the other party would surely remember him. As for the other requests, Song Zhe thought about it carefully and made a suggestion. Sixth young master, if it's possible, I hope to open a young family bank in Jianghu. Although I haven't done any management work, I think Jianghu should be built into a commercial center that radiates to the surrounding areas. If that's the case, it's necessary to have a young family bank to manage the finances. Over the past few days, a lot of resources had been shipped to Shiyu City from the sea. Most of them were clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. The clothing was mainly of various styles. Since this place was going to be managed by the mercenaries in the future, the clothes worn by the people would have to be changed to be more Chinese. They would have to change into traditional Chinese clothing. At the very least, they would have to change from a visual perspective. Fortunately, the garment factory in Qiqian City had expanded in scale. It wasn't too difficult to satisfy the needs of Jianghu. As for the food, it was naturally a large amount of potatoes. Even though it was a little boring to eat them all the time, it was enough to satisfy one's hunger. A person would only have the energy to do more things after eating a full meal. As long as they could endure this period of time, more land in Jianghu would be developed. With more land, not only would they be able to be self-sufficient in terms of food, they might even be able to supply other places. As for the living, it was even simpler. They would have to build more houses. Qiqian City would provide some cement. In addition, there were many mountains, forests, and trees in the vicinity of Jianghu. Building more houses wouldn't be a problem. The last line was related to the problem of road construction. After all, there was a limit to the production of cement. Therefore, they would first have to level the roads between the cities. Then, a cement factory would be built in Jianghu. Slowly, the main road here would be paved with cement. With the development of transportation, there was naturally no problem for commerce to flourish. Yang Qindong had already made certain arrangements before entering Jianghu. Now, he just had to do things step by step. Song Zhe, who knew a little about these things, only needed to follow the plan. However, before the troops and horses were mobilized, the provisions had to be mobilized first. In order to build a place, the most important thing was money. That was why he proposed to set up a young family bank here. As long as there was a bank, the initial funds could be operated in the form of loans. When there was money in the future, it could be slowly repaid. Sure. Yang Qindong nodded and agreed after Song Zhe finished speaking. Setting up a young family bank in Jianghu was part of his plan. Even if Song Zhe didn't mention it, he would have arranged for someone to do it. Then I have no further questions. Song Zhe quickly nodded. Since the sixth young master had already arranged everything, there wasn't much for him to consider. As for whether he would encounter problems in his work in the future, he would just have to deal with them when he encountered them. Good. If there's anything else, you can send someone to contact me. I will settle it for you. Yang Qindong didn't have the experience of building a small country. Therefore, he couldn't overthink everything. Therefore, he gave Song Zhe the privilege of being able to contact him at any time. The matter was finally settled. Song Zhe became the temporary person in charge of Jianghu and Chang Qinhao became the first chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. Yang Qindong hoped that the two of them could work together to transform Jianghu into a truly prosperous place. The matter of Jianghu could be put aside for now. Yang Qindong set his sights on the neighboring Lansang kingdom. Fan Yuhai brought 20,000 Jianghu elites and fled to this kingdom. Logically speaking, this was a good excuse to launch a military attack on the Lansang kingdom. Just like when he dealt with Jianghu previously, he was here under the banner of the Southern Ming Emperor, and also to avenge the assassination attempt on his life. With enough justification, he had a good reason to attack. Now that he had an excuse to deal with the Lansang kingdom, Yang Qindong really wanted to lead the mercenaries to annihilate the kingdom. Unfortunately, before Yang Qindong could decide what to do, the Lansang kingdom had already sent someone to inform him that they were encircling Fan Yuhai's troops. They would definitely give the mercenaries and the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty an explanation. Initially, he thought that it would be too big of a step to make a move on the Lansang kingdom before Jiaoji was stabilized. Since there was no excuse to attack, Yang Chendong could only wait and observe. At the same time, he used this opportunity to train his troops. Speaking of which, in the Battle of Jiaoji, there were too many auxiliary soldiers who contributed greatly and earned the right to be promoted to the Cold Vanguard. At the same time, there were also many temporary auxiliary soldiers who performed well and earned the right to be promoted to auxiliary soldiers. Now, the military was focused on this matter. Even the political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment, Kong Jia, was no longer busy with the construction of Jiaoji. Instead, he started to organize the promotion assessment. Everyone was busy. Yang Chendong brought the first and second guards to join the assessment team. He acted as an invigilator to assess the outstanding soldiers who were promoted from auxiliary soldiers to Cold Vanguard. Southern Ming capital, Nanjing City. Kai Gu, who was covered in dust, rushed back. As soon as he entered the city, before he could even take a sip of water, an embroidered uniformed guard appeared in front of him and brought him to Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect. "Beloved Minister Kai, how did it go?" Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously when he saw Kai Gu in the side hall of the palace. In the side hall, Chao Jixiang, Qian Xingliang, Kai Zhong, and a few other eunuch leaders were also present. Kai Gu knelt on the ground and recounted everything he had seen and heard along the way, including the current situation of Jiaoji. Listening to Kai Gu kneeling on the ground and saying something, Zhu Qizhen's face was sometimes gloomy and sometimes relaxed. His expression was constantly changing. Not only him, but the eunuchs standing below were also shocked. They didn't expect Jiaoji to be wiped out in such a short period of time. This gave them a new understanding and evaluation of the strength of the mercenaries. In less than an hour, Kai Gitsai reported everything he had seen and heard, especially everything he had talked about with the Duke of Loyalty. Then, he kowtowed to the ground with a respectful expression, waiting for the emperor to deal with him. Jiaoji was destroyed just like that, and Lily was captured alive? Zhu Qizhen said in a daze. It could be seen that the high and mighty Zhu Qizhen's expression wasn't too good. Even when the Great Ming Dynasty was at its peak, it was impossible for them to crush Jiaoji like they did with the mercenaries. Perhaps the Great Ming Dynasty's ideology of moderation played a role in this. They never had the thought of destroying other countries. But no matter what, they couldn't do anything to Jiaoji. Now, however, the mercenaries easily destroyed them. Even the old King Lily fell into the hands of the mercenaries and became their prisoner. Judging others by their own standards, how could he not feel a trace of sadness when he thought about such a thing? If the mercenaries could destroy Jiaoji so easily, wouldn't it be a huge headache if they became the enemy of the Great Ming Dynasty? What was going on with Yang Chendong? Why didn't he see that he had this kind of ability before? Was it really just a coincidence that he saved the mercenary leader who had never appeared before, and that's how he gained his current power? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Zhu Qizhen's mind. He actually felt a faint sense of worry in his heart. Zhu Qizhen was speechless for a long time. Chao Jixiang, who was at the side, saw this and guessed the reason. This was also a skill of the head eunuch. If he couldn't guess the emperor's thoughts, he wouldn't be far from being marginalized. In the eyes of the eunuchs, the emperor was their sky and their earth. Naturally, no accidents could happen to him. Chao Jixiang only hesitated for a moment before advising, "Your Majesty, Jiaoji is a small country with a population of less than 2 million. Compared to the Great Ming Dynasty, its cities are like fireflies competing with the bright moon. How can they be compared to the sun? Even if the mercenaries came to occupy our Great Ming Dynasty, they wouldn't have the strength to do so. It's just that the mercenaries reminded us that we have to become stronger ourselves." The first part of his words was to enlighten Zhu Qizhen, while the latter part was hinting at him. Sadness wouldn't solve the problem. Only by developing oneself and strengthening oneself would one be able to do so. To be able to become the emperor, one's wisdom was naturally not something ordinary people could compare to. Just now, he couldn't think straight, which was why he revealed a worried expression. Now that he heard Chao Jixiang's reminder, he thought about his own advantage. If he had to make an analogy, they were like an elephant and the mercenaries were like a poisonous snake. No matter how big the other party's appetite was, they wouldn't be able to swallow him in one gulp. That would only cause indigestion. Otherwise, when he dealt with the Huang bandit army, wouldn't he have taken the opportunity to do something to the Southern Ming dynasty? However, they didn't. This was already very clear. Of course, the other party's strength could increase at any time. If he couldn't grasp this opportunity to help the Southern Ming dynasty rise, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Zhu Qizhen, who had made up his mind to become stronger, seemed to be filled with energy at this moment. Looking at the kneeling Kai Gu, he said, "Dear Minister Kai, please repeat the conditions that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage mentioned." Chapter 542. Yes, Your Majesty. Kai Gu nodded and repeated Yang Chendong's request. In the following time, Zhu Qizhen and the eunuchs discussed how much money they needed to train the new army and how many people they needed to trade. Just as Yang Chendong had expected, Zhu Qizhen did not pay much attention to population. Especially after Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were occupied by the Min King's forces. Many refugees escaped from there and were now entrenched in the southeastern provinces. There were even many who were heading towards Nanjing. According to the reports of the officials, the appearance of these refugees had greatly affected the security of other places. Their daily necessities alone were a big problem, which often gave the local officials a headache. This time, they could use the method of trading to transport these people out. As for whether this would strengthen the mercenary army, not to mention that they did not provide the population, did the mercenary army not have other ways? It was very difficult to make these refugees into an army. These people did not have enough to eat, they did not have warm clothes, and their health was generally not good. Otherwise, the Southern Ming Empire would have recruited them into the army. Otherwise, the Min King's forces would not have easily let them leave their territory. In short, these people were of little value to Zhu Qizhen. Most of them were even burdens. It was a good opportunity to give them to the mercenary army and let them have a headache. It was also a good way to make them worry, so that they would not threaten him with a strong army. After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhen began to order the 3 eunuchs to count the refugee population. According to him, other than those young people with strong bodies and beautiful young women, the rest of the refugees could be used for trading. If they could exchange a large amount of money, the Southern Ming Empire would have the strength to train the new army and strengthen themselves. The number of refugees had already been reported by the local officials. The number of refugees had reached 5 million. Most of them were refugees from Guangdong. Because they had been prepared for the arrival of King of Min's forces in Guangdong, they only got some fields and houses, but very few people. The number of refugees in Guangdong alone had reached nearly 3 million. Among the 5 million people, the ratio of women and men was almost equal, each taking up a third. The ratio of old people and children was also almost equal, each taking up a sixth. With this calculation, a rough result could be obtained from the accounts. The women had about 1.5 million, each 20 taels of silver, which was 30 million taels of silver. The old people had about 900,000, each 5 taels of silver, which was 4.5 million taels of silver. The children had about 900,000, each 15 taels of silver, which was 13.5 million taels of silver. The men had about 1 million, each 500,000 taels of silver, which was 50 million taels of silver. Altogether, the total population was about 4,300,000 people. If they were to trade, they would be able to obtain 98 million taels of silver. After the number came out, even Zhu Qizhen could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He didn't expect that a group of vagrants could increase his income so much. Once they had this 98 million taels of silver, the economy of the Southern Ming Empire would be revitalized. Not only would they have the money to train the new army, they could also make more armor and weapons. At the same time, they could also use it to develop the country. It was not impossible for the Southern Ming Empire to have a drastic change. Good, good, good. Zhu Qizhen said the word good 3 times in a row, completely revealing the excitement in his heart. Pass down my decree, order all the provinces to send all the refugees to the Songjiang prefecture. And not only the refugees, but also those who have committed crimes and have not changed. They will also be sent to the Songjiang prefecture. Great companion, this matter will be handed over to you and beloved Minister Kai Zhong. That's right, don't forget about the Yang family's 4th brother. Immediately remove the surveillance on him and let him quickly contact the Yang family bank. Tell him the specific amount of money we can trade. Don't let them not take out enough money when the time comes. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen had already thrown the threat of Yang Chendong to the side. What he needed to do now was to let the Southern Ming Empire rise again under his leadership. Zhu Qizhen's imperial edicts were passed down without the discussion of the ministers. The reason why he did this was because he did not want to give people the chance to argue. With his understanding of the ministers, once they knew that he had a human trade with the mercenaries, they would definitely stand up to stop it. Even though these ministers were already helpless against the refugees. They had read the books of sages since they were young, so they naturally wanted to learn how to be a saint. They would definitely not agree to abandon the people like this. Since they would not agree, then why did he need their permission? He was the emperor. However, there was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, not to mention that this matter involved so many people. In less than a day, the ministers below knew about this matter. Then, they hurriedly walked into the palace. Needless to say, they were here to persuade him. Regarding this, Zhu Qizhen was already prepared. He used his body as an excuse and refused to meet anyone. As for whether they would make a fuss when they did not see him, it was up to them. If it were not for the Southern Ming Empire's ancestral teachings that there was no need to punish a doctor, he really did not mind looking for a few people at this time to kill the prestige of those ministers who only knew how to eat, drink, and enjoy every day and were useless at critical times. After the imperial edict was passed down, the first to benefit was naturally the Yang family's 4th master, Yang. He was originally staying in Jianghu prefecture. Suddenly, a group of embroidered uniform guards came and took him away from the Yang family's ancestral home without any explanation. This scene was seen by many people at that time. Originally, Jianghu prefecture's magistrate, Li Daotong, wanted to stop it because he knew that this person was the brother of the Duke of Loyal and Courageous. Once something happened in his territory, how could he get away with it? However, when he appeared with a group of magistrates and saw that they were all embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes, black gauze hats, imperial belts, and embroidered spring sabers at their waists, he immediately became terrified. These were all the emperor's people. If he dared to stand out and say half a word, he was afraid that he would be arrested together with them. Seeing that Li Daotong did not even dare to breathe loudly, Yang did not blame him. In fact, he had already prepared for this scene in front of him. He had always heard about some of the things that his 6th brother had done. His achievements were so great that the Yang family would be implicated sooner or later. Therefore, along the way, Yang did not shout or make a fuss. He just followed the embroidered uniform guards and left Jianghu prefecture. His cooperation also saved him from physical pain. Not long after leaving Jianghu, another group of embroidered uniform guards came and announced that this time, it was Emperor Yingzong who invited him to Nanjing to be an official. With the arrival of these embroidered uniform guards, his treatment also improved. At least, no one gave him any face in front of his face. As soon as he entered Nanjing, he was placed in a small courtyard and detained. Although his personal freedom was not restricted, and no one would stop him even if he wanted to go out shopping, there were always embroidered uniform guards following him. However, there were always some embroidered uniform guards following him, which made him realize that he was being watched. Thinking about it, the reason why these people did not make a move on him was probably because his 6th brother's power was flourishing. Before things were settled, they did not want to anger his 6th brother. Just like this, less than 20 days later, an imperial edict suddenly appeared in front of him. He was specially appointed by Emperor Yingzong as the general representative of the Yang family bank in southern Ming. For a time, all the embroidered uniform guards around him withdrew. This time, they really withdrew. No one came to monitor him. He, who had just regained his freedom, saw the current head of the eunuchs, Chao Jixiang, appear in front of him. First, he comforted him for a while. Then, he talked about the problem of the population trade between southern Ming and the Duke of Zhongdan. He also asked him to quickly choose a location in Nanjing, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianghu Prefecture and then raise money. Although it was mostly used to describe women, it could also be used to describe Yang's current situation. Just as Chao Jixiang left with his people, a platoon of cold soldiers appeared in front of him. The person leading them was the platoon leader, Silver Tiger. This person had stayed in the Yang family manor outside Baiming's capital and was one of Yang Qindong's trusted subordinates. Silver Tiger's arrival was not only to protect Fourth Master Yang's safety, but also to help him prepare the Yang family bank. Many contacts with the security bureau had to go through his hands. This was not because Yang Qindong did not trust his fourth brother, but because he did not want his fourth brother to be involved in dangerous matters. The news that southern Ming was going to trade people with the mercenaries spread like a gust of wind. For a time, the various powers had different reactions. When the news reached Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, who was the acting head, was silent at first. Then, he loudly reprimanded Zhu Qizhen in front of his civil and military officials. Since the founding of the Great Ming, our Great Ming has benefited tens of thousands of people. We are determined to let them live a good life. When did we ever trade people? This Zhu Qizhen clearly doesn't care about the rules of our ancestors. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu was already on the same level as Zhu Qizhen. He no longer called him Great Mastering like before. At the very least, he would call him elder cousin. Instead, he directly called him by his name. Zhu Qiyu sat on the golden dragon throne and raged. The officials below all lowered their heads and did not say anything. When the Great Ming was first established, there were indeed some rules. For example, there were no political marriages, no tribute, the Son of Heaven guarded the country, the king died for the country, and so on. This was already a lot more unyielding compared to other dynasties. However, there was no such thing as trading people was prohibited in these rules. Not to mention, in order to survive, the southern Ming even gave the title of king with a different surname. What did it matter if they traded people for military funds? Chapter 543. It was said that southern Baiming was of the same origin, but in reality, they were already two different countries. What would southern Ming do? How could they still care about Baiming's attitude? All of the courtiers were clear about this matter, so no one would foolishly accuse him of anything. They would just let the emperor vent his dissatisfaction. Not to mention, they didn't know whether this dissatisfaction was due to jealousy. Perhaps Dai Zong also wanted to trade with the people to get some money to spend. After all, who would complain about having more money in the national treasury? Although Baiming had already started paying business taxes, Just Immortal Abode, Sky Beyond Heaven, and Yang Family Bank paid a lot of business taxes every month. Now, they were also doing business with Walla. Baiming was heavily taxed. This made Baiming's national treasury much more abundant than southern Ming's. It was just that during this period of time, because of the development of the cannons and guns, they had spent quite a lot of money. More importantly, the progress was still very slow. Based on the current speed, it was unknown how much money they would have to invest in order to achieve results. If there was a new source of income, Zhu Qiyu would definitely be very happy. After Zhu Qiyu said all this, it was possible that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them. Once southern Ming became strong with money, it was also possible that they would threaten Baiming. As for which one it was, who among the officials could say for sure? No one said anything. This made it difficult for Zhu Qiyu to continue his plan of using this matter to ruin Zhu Qizhen's reputation. He, who was already a bit upset, could only wave his hand and announce that the court was dismissed. All of the officials knelt and said, "Long live the emperor." Then, they left. Only Jining, the chief eunuch, stood there without moving. He was originally supposed to serve the emperor. Since Zhu Qiyu didn't leave, he naturally didn't dare and couldn't leave. Beloved official Jin, don't you think Zong's actions are inappropriate? Now that there were no outsiders, Zhu Qiyu was no longer as angry as before. On the contrary, she was very calm and even changed the way she addressed Zhu Qizhen. Jining, who was standing respectfully at the side, was also somewhat unsure of Zhu Qiyu's thoughts. After all, things had happened too quickly. The news had just spread over there, and Zhu Qiyu had already flown into a rage. Jining didn't have time to understand too much. Now that he was asked, he could only speak in a probing tone. "Your Majesty, why don't this official find some people to punish that person in the south?" There's no need for that. Zhu Qiyu hesitated for a while, but in the end, she rejected this method. Presumably, there are some things that we don't need to do, and there will be others who will do it. After all, there is no lack of scholars who call themselves saints in the world, so we don't need to get involved. I'm just curious, why do the mercenaries need so many people? Your subject has heard some rumors. It is said that the mercenaries are engaged in various business transactions on the sea, including human trafficking. It was said that there were some places overseas that were vast but sparsely populated, so some people wanted to move some people there to grow food. Of course, this is just what this official has heard, and there is no proof. As the emperor's personal servant, the most important job was to relieve the emperor's worries, so she had to know all kinds of news. Just like what she had just said, it was a piece of news reported by a little eunuch before the court. Of course, Jining didn't know that this news was originally deliberately spread by Yang Qindong on behalf of the Security Bureau. He was just trying to confuse the public. Anyway, it was just a rumor, so it didn't take much effort. As for whether others believed it or not, it didn't matter so much. Overseas, that's quite possible. Zhu Qiyu nodded gently after hearing this. Because she didn't know, she had no right to speak. The Great Ming dynasty had been forbidden from going to the sea for many years. Regarding the matters overseas, she had only heard about it from the elders. As for the specifics, her impression was very vague. Therefore, since she didn't know the situation outside the sea, Zhu Qiyu didn't express any opinions on this matter. Instead, she suddenly changed the topic and asked, "Beloved official Jin, how many families are there in Biming now, and how many idle people are there?" Jining was still thinking about why she didn't take advantage of this opportunity to criticize the Southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen. When she suddenly heard Zhu Qiyu's question, it was as if a huge thunderbolt flashed in her mind. She immediately understood the meaning of her master's words. It seemed that she also intended to follow suit. Ever since Zhu Qiyu ascended to the throne, she vigorously encouraged the people to have more children and increase the population. The results were quite good. With the emergence of a high-yield domestic crop like potatoes, and the fact that Biming originally didn't have as much territory as the Southern Ming dynasty, it was normal for her to do this. It could be imagined that if this continued, in a dozen years, the population of Biming would greatly increase. If she could use these people to trade for silver to develop Biming, it could be considered a path to advancement. As for why Zhu Qiyu didn't do this now, it was clear that she wanted to see how the wind would blow and how much resistance there would be. This was also why Zhu Qiyu didn't arrange for people to criticize Zhu Qizhen. After thinking through everything, Jining only hesitated for a moment before replying, "Your Majesty, the Southern Ming dynasty has just experienced internal strife and war, so there are more refugees. However, we have always been peaceful here and don't have that many idle people. Of course, there are still quite a few of them in the prison. They are all criminals who committed crimes during the rebellion in the capital. If we were to gather them together, we would be able to gather 50,000 of them. Most importantly, they are mostly adult men." The last sentence was to tell, or perhaps remind Zhu Qiyu, that although there weren't many idle people, they were the most valuable people. One person could be exchanged for 50 taels of silver. 50,000 people would be 2,500,000 taels of silver. Yes, we still have to deal with the matter of public order. It's true that we don't have internal strife in Biming, but we have to take precautions. It was clear that Zhu Qiyu wasn't very satisfied with the number of 50,000 taels. After all, it wasn't even 10 million taels of silver. The effect it could have was still too small. Hearing that they had to deal with public order, that meant that they had to punish more people. If that was the case, there would be more criminals in the future. Then, they could make a large sum of money in transactions. Jining, who understood the emperor's meaning, quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I will discuss this matter with Minister Su of the Ministry of Justice." Good. He didn't say much and only nodded slightly. After all, as the emperor, he couldn't be too unsightly when eating. It could be said that Zhu Qizhen's actions had provoked Zhu Qiyu a little. He was worried that the southern Ming dynasty would suddenly develop after obtaining large amounts of gold and silver. For this, he also needed to expand his financial resources. Otherwise, the strength of the two sides might develop in the wrong direction. However, no one would have thought that because of Zhu Qizhen's human trafficking, the public order in Biming had improved greatly. Some of the Biming men who usually stole chickens and dogs and committed crimes were often thrown into jail because of small crimes. Unless their families were willing to spend money to redeem them, no one else had any intention of letting them out. As these people were arrested, more people were alerted. The public order in the city and on the streets gave people a new feeling. Min Palace. Min King Zhu Huiping also received news about the human trafficking in the southern Ming dynasty. Compared to Biming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, who wanted to wait and see, his attitude was much more direct. Send someone to check if there are any homeless people who don't have enough to eat in our territory. Also, arrest those who should be arrested. Don't be polite. In addition, send someone to Jiaoji and contact the Duke of Zhongdan to see if he is interested in trading with us. Even though he knew that doing this would attract the reprimand and dissatisfaction of some so-called scholars and even old teachers, Zhu Huiping, who wanted to develop, didn't care so much. Originally, he and the southern Ming dynasty had a hostile relationship. Now that the enemy had reached this step and the treasury was full, they were about to become stronger. Then why couldn't he also take advantage of this matter? However, Min King's faction was in the process of expansion and stabilization. They also needed a large number of people to farm or work. There really weren't any extra people. Alright, this wasn't a big deal. Those who were willing to work hard would be used first, but those who were idling around had to be captured. Once enough people were gathered, they would naturally be able to trade with the mercenaries for gold and silver. Therefore, after Biming, the public order in most of Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong under Min King's faction had improved. This was something that Yang Chendong didn't expect before. At this time, Yang Chendong also received news from the front. When he learned that the southern Ming dynasty wanted to take out more than 4 million people to trade with him, he was stunned at first. Then, he laughed happily. Originally, he thought that even if something as big as human trafficking could be done, because of the existence of those old teachers, there wouldn't be much success in the beginning. Even if Zhu Qizhen lacked money, he couldn't go too far in the environment where the Confucians were the center. It was just that he never thought that Zhu Qizhen would be so bold when doing things. He actually transacted more than 4 million people in one go. This was completely beyond his expectations, and he never thought that it would happen. Immediately send a ship to Qiqian City to inform Yu Qian. Tell him to send more silver. Also, build more houses and prepare more clothes and food. Also, inform the Navy to prepare more transport ships, the more the better. Yang Chendong excitedly stood up and continuously gave orders to Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side. Oh right, call Yang San over. This time, so many people came at once. It is impossible for the southern Ming dynasty to not arrange for spies. Tell him to arrange people to keep an eye on suspicious people. Don't let the situation in Qiqian City be exposed. Yang Chendong thought for a while and added. Chapter 544. This time, there were more than 4 million people involved in the transaction. With such a large population, it would be too much work to completely screen out the spies sent by the Southern Ming Empire. Since that was the case, it would be better not to screen them but to control them from the source. Once they entered Crimson City, they would not be released until they were thoroughly investigated. This way, even if the spies obtained the information they wanted, it would be useless if they could not upload it to Ryukyu Island. With so many Han citizens in his hands, it was obvious that the manpower in Crimson City would definitely be sufficient. As long as these newcomers were given time to get used to each other, it would not be long before a large number of useful people would appear under him. At that time, it would be time for him to expand greatly. Tiger's Mane went out to handle some matters. Yang Chendong was still a little excited and could not sit still. Looking at Beta Persei standing beside him, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Oh right, is there any news from the Lansang Kingdom?" "Young master, not yet," Beta Persei said in a low voice. He had no choice but to lower his voice. His voice was a little too loud. If he did not lower his voice, who knew if he would be frightened by the young master? If that happened, the young master would be scolded again. "Not yet." "Then go and tell the messenger in charge of contacting the Lansang Kingdom to give them 10 days. If there is still no news, then we will have to go and capture them ourselves." With so many Han citizens, Yang Chendong could be said to be full of confidence. If the Lansang Kingdom wanted to continue to be perfunctory, he did not mind sending troops to destroy them. Although the time was not completely ripe yet, if he squeezed a little, it could be considered as barely occupying another country. Yang Chendong's tone became a lot more vigorous. When the news reached the Kanglan Kingdom, King Paisai became nervous. Who was Yang Chendong? He was the general of the mercenary army. The powerful Jiaoji Kingdom had been destroyed so easily. In comparison, in terms of military strength, they were slightly weaker than Jiaoji, although he did not want to admit this fact. Previously, Jiaoji was the scapegoat for sending assassins to assassinate Yang Chendong, and was annihilated just like that. Now that Fan Yuhai was in Kanglan Kingdom, this excuse absolutely could not fall into the hands of the other party. General Sangwang was called and Paisai inquired about it. Sangwang La, the representative general of the Laos, was just like Lottie, the general of the Laos who had fallen into a trap. The only difference was that he was representing the interests of the Laos. "Your Majesty, General Sisi is having a meeting with General Fan Yuhai. It's just that according to the news from the front, some of what General Fan said is not without reason." Sangwang La first bowed to Paisai, then told him what he had just learned. The so-called General Sexy is also one of the famous generals of the Lansang Kingdom. He represents the interests of the old dragon clan. "What did General Fan Yuhai say?" Paisai asked with a deep expression. "Your Majesty, General Fan said that since the mercenaries can find a reason to annihilate Jiaoji, they can also find a reason to deal with our Lansang Kingdom in the future. In other words, this war will be fought sooner or later. Since that's the case, why don't we take advantage of the fact that the enemy is tired from the battle and suddenly attack? At least we will have the upper hand, and General Fan Yuhai will fully support us when the time comes. It's equivalent to having one more ally and more strength." Sangwang La said as he carefully observed King Paisai's expression. King Paisai fell silent when he heard this. How could he not know this? In the words of the Han people, this was called, without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. However, the mercenaries were pressing him. If he did not hand over Fan Yuhai, he would be in trouble. The current Lansang Kingdom was not ready for war yet. Especially after the defeat of General Lottie's 100,000 soldiers, the entire kingdom was afraid of war when the mercenaries were mentioned. If they did not get rid of this fear, how could they fight the next war? Seeing Paisai standing there in silence, Sangwang La spoke softly. Sangwang La, who was watching from the side, whispered, "Your Majesty, why don't we tell the mercenaries that Fan Yuhai escaped with his soldiers and we didn't catch him? This way, at least on the surface, they will not be able to find trouble with us. Unless they want to deal with us in the first place, then there is no need for a reason at all." Is that okay? Payasai asked without confidence. Why not? To put it bluntly, we are already giving them face by doing this. We are not a vassal state of the mercenaries. Why do we have to listen to them? We have already done our part by giving them a way out. Again, unless they really want to be our enemy, then no matter what we do, we will not be able to avoid a war. On the other hand, if they don't intend to use force against us, they won't make things difficult for us over this matter. After all, they are still 20,000 soldiers, and they are the most elite soldiers of Jiaoji. They are a force to be reckoned with, Sang Wenlu said with a confident look on his face. In fact, since the mercenaries sent people to ask about Fan Yuhai, the relationship between the two sides became tense. Everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. It was just that the result of this war was sooner or later. Since that was the case, there was no need to make any concessions. At most, they would just fight. At least if they fought now, they would have 20,000 more soldiers. On the other hand, if they only wanted to curry favor with the mercenaries, Fan Yuhai's 20,000 soldiers would not be easy to deal with. The Lansung kingdom did not know how much they would have to pay. Alright, then go and arrange for someone to talk to the mercenary emissary. Right, tell the army to be on alert. King Payasai touched his forehead and said with a headache. Where did these mercenaries come from? How did they suddenly appear and destroy his neighbor, Jiaoji? All of this happened too quickly, and the pressure it gave him was too great. It actually made him feel like he was in a dilemma. Yang Qindong, who was in the neighboring country, received news about the Lansung kingdom 2 days later. After hearing the reply, he laughed and put the matter aside. The Lansung king was also smart. He knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later, so he did not agree to his request. That was fine, he could just put it aside first. It was just an extra 20,000 soldiers from Fan Yuhai, so the mercenaries did not put them in their eyes. As for not looking for trouble now, it did not mean that they would not look for trouble in the future. The most important thing now was to get the 4.3 million Han people to Ryukyu Island first. Yang Qindong retracted his gaze from the Lansung kingdom and even called back the representative he had sent. He ordered the Security Bureau to send back the news from the Songjiang prefecture of the Southern Ming Empire in a timely manner. After requesting an update every day, he placed all his attention on the integration of the army. After the destruction of the Huang bandits and the Battle of Jiaoji, the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front and a few auxiliary battalions had expanded to more than 10,000 people. After the accumulation of military achievements and the improvement of personal military qualities, the auxiliary soldiers had the opportunity to become Cold Front soldiers. After the various tests began, more and more people with the ability to pass the test joined Ling Feng's team. The auxiliary soldiers' assessment to become Cold Front soldiers was given to the 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jie. Yang Qindong's main focus was on the officers' assessment. One of the most important points was the establishment of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Yes, now that the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, 3 battalions and a regiment, a total of 1,300 people, had been established, it was time to choose a new regiment commander. There were 3 candidates for the position of regiment commander. They were the original 1st Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. Whether it was the destruction of the Huang bandits or the Battle of Jiaoji, the 3 battalion commanders had performed well. If not for the fact that the Cold Front was not strong enough, all 3 of them would have had the qualifications to be regiment commander. However, since the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front was newly established, there was only one position for regiment commander. Naturally, it was impossible for all 3 of them to be regiment commanders. In the end, Yang Qindong made some choices and balanced them out, promoting the 3 battalion commanders to different degrees. After the reshuffling, the 2nd Regiment commander was still Luo Pe, who was also the commander of the 2nd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Kong Jie was still the same. The original 3rd Battalion commander Kong Chuanxin was promoted to the 2nd Regiment's Chief of Staff, becoming a deputy regiment commander. The position of 3rd Battalion Commander was given to 1st Company Commander Tian Su, who had performed the best. The new regiment commander of the 3rd Regiment, Wu Sheng, was also the commander of the 3rd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Chen Bo was also the commander of the 2nd Battalion. 3rd Battalion Commander Chun Yang, who was originally a company commander of the 2nd Battalion, was also promoted. In addition, the original reconnaissance company was promoted to a reconnaissance battalion, and the 1st Battalion commander was Su Yunsheng, who was originally a company commander. After the reshuffling, Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and Kong Chuanxin were promoted to regiment commander and deputy regiment commander respectively. It was a happy ending for everyone. Don't worry about scarcity, worry about inequality. There were only so many positions, so it was no wonder that Yang Chendong wanted to divide the spoils. Having been in the army before, he knew very well that the relationship between officers was that of good buddies and iron comrades in arms, but at the same time, there was also a competitive relationship. If this subtle relationship was not handled well, it could lead to a big mistake. Fortunately, Yang Chendong's prestige was enough. After this distribution, everyone was happy. Even Chief of Staff Kong Chuanxin, who was only promoted by half a rank, didn't show the slightest displeasure. This made Yang Chendong feel relieved. The original 1 regiment of Cold Front was expanded into 2 regiments. At this moment, the auxiliary troops also grew stronger. Originally, there were only 12 battalions. Even after transferring a regiment of soldiers to Lingfeng, they still managed to expand to 15 battalions due to the temporary addition of auxiliary soldiers. On the other hand, the temporary auxiliary troops were reduced from the original 14 battalions to 6 battalions. After passing the test, they would directly become auxiliary troops. Chapter 545. This was because the mercenary army was temporarily not recruiting. Otherwise, there would be many young men in Jiaoji who would want to join the army. After all, the treatment and conditions of the mercenary army were too good, making people envious. However, in order to ensure the purity of the army, Yang Chendong did not have the intention of letting other foreign races join. If he really needed temporary auxiliary soldiers, the Southern Ming Empire had prepared a total of 4.5 million people for him. Among them, the proportion of adult men was more than 1 million. At that time, he would not be able to get as many as he wanted. After this round of adjustment, nearly a month had passed. At this time, the coast of the Southern Ming Empire's Songjiang Prefecture could be said to be a busy scene. For nearly a month, the Yangtze Navy had been doing the transportation work. Later on, when the Southern Ming dynasty opened the prison cells in the various prefectures and sold the 200,000 prisoners to the mercenaries, the total number of people involved in this transaction reached 4.5 million, and the transaction amount also reached 99 million taels of silver. Because the Great Ming Empire did not pay attention to commerce and focused on agriculture, their annual tax revenue was only 10 million. After deducting the official's salary and various expenses, the total amount of money that could be deposited into the national treasury was only 6 to 8 million. It could be said that the Great Ming Empire was not rich. Even compared to the weaker Song dynasty, the national treasury's annual income was more than 15 million. In addition, the Great Ming Empire was now divided into the north and south. After the Southern Ming Empire lost 3 provinces' taxes, the national treasury's annual income was only a pitiful 3 million. This time, the Southern Ming Empire's emperor, Zhu Qizhen, could imagine how rich and imposing the Southern Ming Empire's emperor Yingzong would feel. When the last batch of people were sent onto the Yang family navy's transport ship, and the last sum of money was delivered to the chief eunuch Chao Jixiang by Yang Yang's hands, the Southern Ming Empire's vigorous new army training had begun. Various kinds of bustling weapon factories had also appeared. With money in the national treasury, the various departments of the Southern Ming Empire also began to complain about being poor. Facing this situation, Zhu Qizhen, who was in a great mood, waved his pen and approved all those who had a legitimate reason to ask for money. For a time, the entire upper echelons of the Southern Ming dynasty were in a jubilant mood. As for those who criticized Zhu Qizhen for trading people, there were much fewer voices. Unlike the nouveau riche mentality of the southern Ming dynasty, the original capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi City, had a newly built commercial street that was soon open for business. At this moment, Yang Chendong had changed the name of Jiaoji to Vietnam, which would be their name in the future. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to change it to Yunnan province. However, considering the feelings of the two emperors, he didn't provoke them and didn't do it immediately. The commercial street was fully prepared by the first officer of the Vietnam region, Song Zhe, and opened for business. The entire street was 1,500 meters long and there were over 100 shops of different sizes. Here, one could see all kinds of items sold by the mercenaries, such as toothpaste, toothbrushes, toilet paper, soap, chewing gum, white sugar, and all kinds of condiments. There were all kinds of new types of clothing, outerwear, qipao, women's underwear, glasses, and all kinds of packaged drinks. There were also instant noodles, ham sausages, and all kinds of portable canned food, canned pork shoulder, preserved vegetables with pork, for happiness meatballs, mushroom meat sauce, sweet and sour pork ribs, red braised pork. There were also high-grade divine objects, mirrors, floor clocks, perfumes, and sets of beautifully packaged cosmetics, lipsticks, and so on. As long as one entered the commercial street, one would immediately be dazzled by the dazzling lineup. The nearby merchants who heard the news could only hate that they didn't have enough eyes and hated that they didn't have enough money on them. Although the prices of the items sold in the commercial street were not high, the demand still exceeded the supply. Especially the divine objects like the mirror and the floor clocks. The former was priced at 100,000 taels of silver, while the latter was priced at 200,000 taels of silver. Soon, more than a dozen of such good things were sold. This was because the merchants didn't bring much money with them. Otherwise, they would have sold as many as they had. Think about it. How many nobles were there in a country? Even if a noble only wanted one, the country could sell hundreds and thousands of them. The most important thing was that these items were only sold by the mercenaries. As for imitating them after they bought them, it was like casually finding something from the clock. That would be enough for them to study for a long time. Once they finished their research, there would be a new product in the Crimson Nest City. Once the items were sold, it represented a large amount of money. In this era of monopoly, what was even more hateful was that there was no need to pay taxes. In just a short 7 days, the total amount of transactions reached 50 million taels of silver. This was only the first batch, because there were already many merchants who said that they would immediately return to their countries to prepare their money and prepare to come again. With regards to these potential customers, the mercenaries naturally welcomed them. In order to provoke them, Song Zhe intentionally spread the news that good items were limited. If they came late, they might not be able to buy them even if they had money. As a result, those merchants left Vietnam without stopping. They only wanted to return to their countries to deal with the items in their hands and bring more money to Crimson Nest City. The 50 million taels of silver were left for daily expenses. The total amount of 50 million taels of silver was loaded onto the ship by Yang Chendong. Then, he personally led 2 cold vanguard platoons and 14 auxiliary battalions to Ryukyu Island. Considering the importance of Vietnam, and the fact that Yuan Chunsheng, Hong Jin, and Chindi had not completely stopped the rebellion of the Jiaoji army, Yang Chendong left behind a cold vanguard platoon, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 6 temporary auxiliary battalions for Song Zhe to use. At the same time, he also left behind 50,000 educated youths in Crimson Nest City. With them, the prosperity of Jiaoji, which was now Vietnam, was just around the corner. This time, Yang Chendong did not leave with great fanfare. After all, he was still the loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty. He still had to consider some things. However, when he stood on the bow of the ship and looked at the waves below his feet, he couldn't help but feel extremely excited as he got closer and closer to Crimson City. The last time he left Crimson Nest City was in 1448 AD. Now, it was already the 10th month of 1451 AD. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Although he had been reading various reports about Crimson Nest City and had a certain understanding of the development there, he did not see it personally. After all, he did not see it with his own eyes. His heart was filled with anticipation. On the large ship, the 2nd Marine Regiment's commander Nye Tong, the 2nd Marine Regiment's commander Luo Pa, the 3rd Marine Regiment's commander Wu Sheng, and the others were accompanying Yang Qindong. Each and every one of them was in high spirits, as if they were returning home in glory. "Commander Nye, how is the situation on the island?" The Shang dynasty should have been suppressed for a long time. After enjoying the sea breeze for a while, Yang Qindong calmed down a little. He turned to look at Commander Nye Tong. The reason why Yang Qindong wanted to make a trip to Crimson Nest City was not only to see how the development there was, but also to provide appropriate technical guidance. Of course, this guidance referred to taking out some relevant books. Previously, he did not give out too profound books because he was afraid that those people would not be able to understand and would be misled. Another reason was to completely take over Wuxia Island. Originally, he was worried about the lack of population. Even if he destroyed the Shang dynasty, he would not be able to control it well. However, it was different now. With the 4.5 million people from the southern Ming dynasty, although they could not use all of them, at least half of them would be sufficient. Hearing Yang Qindong ask about the situation of the Shang dynasty, Nye Tong immediately came over and said excitedly, "Sixth young master, everything is ready. Our brothers have said that under the joint attack of the army and navy, the Shang dynasty would be completely destroyed in 3 days." "Very good." Hearing this answer, Yang Qindong laughed heartily in satisfaction. Since he came to this world, it had only been 3 years. However, he had changed too much. Once the foundation was laid, it would be the time for the Han race to soar into the world. The new pier of Crimson Nest City was currently filled with people. Many people were standing on the newly built cement plaza and looking into the distance. This was also because Division Master Leng Song was leading the team to maintain public order. Some unnecessary people had already been cleared away and went back to doing what they were supposed to do. Otherwise, the number of people waiting here would have increased exponentially. However, some people could be persuaded to leave, but some people could not be persuaded at all. For example, there were a few madams standing under a large umbrella. Although it was already October, when the sun was at its peak in the afternoon, it would still feel hot when the sun shone on one's body. The umbrellas were only used to prevent the sun from shining on them. Hu Yan, Madame Shui, and Hu Man were waiting there with their respective maids Xiao Qing, Xiao Wei, and Xiao Yun. About 50 meters away from them, there was a tall young lady in military attire who was also standing there and looking up. This lady was wearing a camouflage military uniform with the insignia of a major. She stood there with her back straight. Perhaps because she was exposed to the sun often, her skin was not very white. Strictly speaking, it was still a healthy, wheat-like complexion. It was precisely because of this that when her large eyes blinked, she appeared to be more spirited and had an indescribable heroic temperament. She was the head of the Crimson Nest City's military propaganda department, Wan Xiaoyu. She was the girl that Yang Qindong hugged 3 years ago. However, compared to that time, she was now nearly 1.6 meters tall. One must know that she was not yet 14 years old, but she already had a pair of long legs. If she continued to grow in this way, it would be easy for her to reach 1.7 meters tall. Chapter 546. Her body proportions were already very good to begin with, and with the addition of the military uniform, it added a bit of temperament. If it wasn't for the fact that she still looked somewhat immature, it was likely that any man who saw her would inevitably be unable to walk. But even if she wasn't 14 years old, in the entire Qiqian city, who knew how many men secretly liked her? If it wasn't for the rumor that she liked the god of Qiqian city, and that Lord God also liked her, it was likely that those who came to ask for her hand in marriage would have already trampled over her doorstep. It wasn't strange, in that era, there were many women who got married at the age of 14, and there were even some who became mothers at this age. But Luan Xiaoyu was not an ordinary person. Not only was it rumored that she had a good relationship with Lord God, just based on the status of the Luan family in Qiqian City, it was something that few people could compare to. Luan Xiaochen's brother, Luan Qi, was now the manager of the power plant. Luan Xiaochen's mother, Zhou Hua, was now the manager of the garment factory. Even her brother, Luan Xiaochen, was now a battalion-level instructor, and also had the military rank of major. A family of 4, all of them were officers, and their ranks were not low. How could an ordinary person be worthy of a woman from such a family? Not to mention, Luan Xiaoyu had always been very proud, and her heart had long been stolen away when she first met Yang Qindong. How could she put anyone else in her eyes? If it wasn't for the fact that she was on military duty and couldn't leave the island, she would have already gone to the Great Ming Dynasty to find her sweetheart. As a matter of fact, knowing that Yang Qindong was going to return to the island to investigate, she had long since arrived at the new pier to wait. And in the process of waiting, her eyes would occasionally look at Hu Yan and the other women not far away. Luan Xiaoyu knew that these 3 women were the wives and concubines of Lord God. This news had long spread after they came to the island. For this matter, her mother, Zhou Hua, had already told her more than once to get closer to the 3 madams when she had the time. After all, they would all be serving the same master in the future, and if she built a good relationship now, she wouldn't be at a disadvantage in the future. This was one of the benefits of a man in a feudal society. As long as one had the ability to marry a few concubines, there was absolutely no problem. Not only would no one criticize you, but they would also think that it was right and proper. After all, capable people needed women to give birth to their children, didn't they? It was just that Luan Xiaoyu was still a little young in the end, and her skin was a little thin. Therefore, although she knew of the existence of these 3 madams, she had never gone to visit. She also believed that these 3 madams would also know of her existence. After all, in Crimson City, she was more or less a celebrity. She didn't rely on her parents, elder brother, or her relationship with the god. As the head of the military's propaganda department, she organized many programs for the female soldiers under her, which greatly boosted the morale of the military and factory workers. More than once, she was praised by the 2 commanders, Leng Song and Gao Xiong, for her excellent performance. Even Lord Yu Qian, who was in charge of Crimson City, was full of praise for this little girl. Right, speaking of this Lord Yu, he was one of the few Yang Xia officials who didn't come to the new pier to welcome Yang Qindong. Perhaps he still didn't know how to face Yang Qindong, or perhaps he was just a workaholic, and didn't want to waste his time on this kind of exchange of favors. Instead, it was Leng Song and Gao Xiong who were already standing here. The reason why they were able to have everything they had now was completely because of Yang Qindong's recognition and promotion. Even if it was for the sake of repaying the favor, they still had to appear here. Indeed, when so many people were waiting here, under everyone's anticipation, the shadow of a large ship finally appeared in the distance. Then, they heard someone loudly shout, "The ship is here." This shout attracted everyone's attention. Even the 3 madams who had been sitting under the large umbrella couldn't help but stand up, expressing the anxiety and anticipation in their hearts. The ship that Yang Qindong was on was a new type of ship, powered by coal, and its speed was naturally extremely fast. In less than an hour, the ship had already arrived at the new pier, and began to slowly approach the shore. At the new pier, there were already Navy personnel directing and carrying out the security work. Although Crimson City was Yang Xia's base, and there shouldn't be anyone who could threaten Yang Qindong here. However, for the sake of safety, the necessary security work still had to be done. Just like when the ship approached the shore, the first and second guards came down first, and took over and supplemented the security work. After the security work was arranged, Yang Qindong walked out of the ship with Luo Pa and Niayong, and came to the new pier. When his footsteps landed on the new pier, Yang Qindong felt a very strong sense of security. He couldn't help but feel better, and laughed heartily. Husband. As soon as Yang Qindong stepped into the cement square in front of the pier, Hu Yan had already come over with the 3rd madam, Lady Shui, and the 5th madam, Su Man, Madam, thank you for your hard work. Seeing Hu Yan and the other 2 women coming over together, Yang Qindong even grinned. Then, in front of everyone, he opened his arms and hugged Hu Yan, who was walking in front, in his arms. This action was naturally emotional. Although they hadn't been separated for a long time, they had experienced a lot, and it gave people a feeling of being separated for a long time. In addition, Yang Chendong was an emotional person, so at this moment, he naturally didn't suppress his emotions. However, such an action was still a bit exaggerated in the eyes of others. Some of the surrounding security guards and Navy soldiers couldn't help but quickly turn their heads in other directions. Obviously, for them, such an action was still a bit too much. At that time, even if there was something between husband and wife, they had to go back to the boudoir to do it. In front of outsiders, hugging was already considered an immoral thing. Once some old masters saw it, they would inevitably be lectured, or even punished. However, Yang Chendong didn't have such awareness. This was just a hug in public. Compared to the later generations who dared to kiss on the street, this was really nothing. This hug made Hu Yan very happy, but she was also a little shy. Her cheeks were red, and she whispered in Yang Chendong's ear, "Husband, many people are watching. Besides, if you want a hug, you can't just hug me. There are also 2 sisters." This was the demeanor of a first wife. Her husband had other women. Not only could she not stop it, but she also had to pretend to be very magnanimous. Even if this magnanimity was just a pretense, she had to keep up the pretense. Otherwise, the title of a jealous woman would fall on her head. Listening to Hu Yan whispering to him, Yang Chendong chuckled and whispered, Then I'll deal with you tonight." Then, regardless of Hu Yan's blushing face, he let go of her and hugged Madame Shui and Su Monair, who were beside him. Naturally, the 2 women's faces were bright red and glistening. After hugging the 3 women, Hu Yan walked up and pointed her chin forward slightly. "Husband, there's another sister over there." Yang Chendong looked up with some confusion and saw Wan Xiaoyu standing in the crowd. Although she was surrounded by a group of female soldiers, she still stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens, standing out from the crowd. "This is Xiaoyu? Huh, you've grown so tall." Yang Chendong's memory was good. He recognized Wan Xiaoyu when she seemed to have changed her appearance. Then, he laughed heartily and strode over. Seeing Yang Chendong walking toward her, Wan Xiaoyu's heart pounded. Then, she didn't know where she got the courage to run over and plunge into Yang Chendong's arms. Hugging Wan Xiaoyu, feeling her accelerated heartbeat and the fragrance of a young girl coming from her body, Yang Chendong couldn't help but feel emotional. The scene of the first time he saw this woman appeared in his mind. The malnourished girl who seemed to be extremely happy just by getting a piece of candy had now become a young girl and had grown up. Wan Xiaoyu felt Yang Chendong's broad chest and the warmth of his body, which made her feel intoxicated. She didn't know how many times she had imagined this scene in her heart. She just hoped that this moment would stay here forever. It was just that it was difficult for beautiful things to last forever. Not far away, 2 military officers with the rank of colonel came over. They were the 2 division commanders, Ling Song and Gao Xiong. "Okay, go to your sister whose place first. We'll catch up later." Patting Wan Xiaoyu's back, Yang Chendong said softly. "Okay." Wan Xiaoyu happily agreed. She had already understood the meaning behind these words. Since she was allowed to stay by Hu Yan's side and call her sister, didn't that mean that he had acknowledged her position? Wan Xiaoyu ran to Hu Yan and the other 2 with a red face and called them sister one by one. Then, she quickly laughed and chatted with them, becoming one of them. On this side, Ling Song and Gao Xiong had already stood in front of Yang Chendong and gave a standard military salute. Yang Chendong first returned the salute with a solemn expression. After he put down his arms, he smiled and raised his hand to punch Ling Song and Gao Xiong in the chest. "Not bad, you 2 have become a lot stronger. If there's a chance, let's spar." Feeling the sincere friendship shown by Yang Chendong, the 2 division commanders also laughed. But they didn't give any answer to this matter of sparring. Not for anything else, but because they had long heard that the sixth young master's strength had improved a lot recently. Even the entire second guard team of 20 people was no longer his opponent. Although the first guard team could still suppress him, it seemed that they wouldn't be able to last long. Sooner or later, they would be defeated. Chapter 547. Such a pervert, how could the two teachers overestimate themselves and challenge him? Although losing to the sixth young master wasn't shameful, if they were to challenge him despite knowing that they were no match for him, wouldn't that be asking for trouble? After the two division commanders, several other regimental officers came over and saluted. As for the other battalion officers, they could forget about it. With Yang Chendong's status, battalion officers would find it difficult to get close to him unless they were on a combat mission. Accompanied by Leng Song and Gao Xiong, Yang Chendong walked out of the new pier. He did not choose to sit in a carriage, but instead decided to take a stroll through the streets to see how Crimson City had changed. The cement road was 12 meters wide, and on both sides were neatly constructed cement houses. From time to time, he could even see a few tall buildings rising. All of this left Yang Chendong nodding his head in approval. This was only the outer perimeter of Crimson City, but it was already so well maintained. In terms of hygiene, Yang Chendong was particularly satisfied. In comparison, the cities of the Great Ming Dynasty were completely lacking in quality. Back in the Great Ming Dynasty, even the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty was filthy and disorderly. In terms of urban environment, the streets were cramped and filled with feces and urine, with mosquitoes and flies flying about. The sweltering heat of summer exuded an unpleasant stench, and when it rained, there would be waterlogging everywhere, causing plagues to occur from time to time. On the other hand, the streets of Crimson City were not only wide, but also clean and sanitary. Every several hundred meters, one could see a public toilet, effectively solving the problem of people going to the toilet. Of course, this was just a difference in terms of hardware. In terms of people, the streets of the Great Ming Dynasty were filled with eunuchs, prostitutes, and beggars. All sorts of ugliness reigned supreme in the world. In terms of the mental state of the citizens, there were many greedy and lazy people, and few kind and diligent people. Unlike in Resin City, there was almost no one on the streets. What he saw the most was the towering chimneys. From time to time, black smoke would come out, indicating that the factories were in operation. The workers were busy with production and self-sufficient. It could be said that the scenery here was completely different from the outside world. Yang Chendong wasn't the only one who felt this way. Even the newcomers felt the same way. Just like the 5 million Han people who arrived earlier than him, they were stunned by the beautiful scenery here. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, even the heaven in their hearts was nothing more than this. They quickly entered a temporary resting place. Although it was only a temporary house built in a rush, the conditions and environment were much better than their previous living conditions. At this moment, the people who had originally left their homes and were still resentful towards this place quickly adapted to it. Not many people thought of leaving. Not bad. The environment is good and the streets are clean. After walking for a while, they could see green grass and tall, thick, and lush trees. Yang Chendong had a satisfied look on his face. Green City was something he had considered when he first built Red Nest City. A good environment could always make people happy. In such an environment, when people were in a good mood, their efficiency in doing things would also increase. As for Yang Chendong's performance, the two teachers didn't dare to claim credit. This was all arranged by the sixth young master before he left. They were just following the instructions, so they just laughed. Alright, although the order was given by me, you guys also deserve credit for carrying it out. Yang Chendong seemed to know why the two of them were laughing, so he directly said it. Yes, thank you for the praise, sixth young master. The two teachers quickly stood up and bowed. Yang Chendong smiled and asked the two to put down their hands, then continued walking forward. At this moment, they arrived at a large factory surrounded by walls. This should be a factory, but I don't know what it is for. Replying to the sixth young master, this is the main garment factory. Leng Song explained. Oh. Hearing that it was the main garment factory, Yang Chendong nodded. Then let's go in and take a look. This was out of curiosity, and also a kind of inspection. It was a surprise inspection. However, it was obvious that Leng Song and Gao Xiong didn't have any intention of rejecting this request, nor did they show any signs of nervousness. It was obvious that they were very confident in this place and weren't afraid of inspection. Yang Chendong saw the two teachers' reactions and nodded to himself. His footsteps didn't stop as he walked into the factory with the signboard of the main garment factory. Red Nest City implemented military-style management, so there were naturally guards at the entrance of such factories. On this point, Yang Chendong learned from some factories in the future. In order to prevent some people from causing trouble, every factory had a department and organization called the security department. If the security department couldn't solve a problem, they would contact the nearby public security bureau. If they still couldn't solve it, then they would have to use the military. The guards here were very competent. If not for the factory's workers, they wouldn't be allowed to enter. It was just that this time, Yang Chendong's background was too great. Not to mention the group of people following him from afar, just the two people beside him were actually the strongest representatives of Crimson City's military. Two division commanders had come together. This lineup made the guards in charge of guarding the factory a little flustered. Then, someone immediately ran to the inner department of the factory to report. At this moment, the main garment factory was also very lively. The reason why it was called the main garment factory and not the main garment factory was because it wasn't made up of just one factory. Inside, there were the first textile factory, the second textile factory, the garment factory's underwear factory, and the military uniform factory. It was said that there were also small military and other factories arranged here. Because the scale was limited, they didn't set up their own factories. For example, in a garment factory, there were male garment factories and female garment factories. As a result, the number of workers in the main garment factory had reached 50,000. It seemed that 50,000 people in a large factory wasn't a small number. If they were divided into several branch factories, and each branch factory was still operating on 3 shifts, then this amount of people wouldn't be considered much at all. It must be known that in this era, there were simply too few machines. Most of them relied on manual labor. Fortunately, because of Yang Chendong's appearance, he had gotten some simple blueprints, and used the blacksmiths and craftsmen to make them. Furthermore, with the development and usage of electricity, the efficiency had been raised to a certain extent. However, it was clear that the number of people was still insufficient. Once the 4.5 million Han people had adapted to the environment and life here, it was destined that the garment factory would have to continue expanding, perhaps even more than double in size. The reason why it was so lively was because the factory director, Zhou Hua, as well as a few branch factory directors, had been gathered. The person who had gathered them was the current manager of Red Nest City, Yu Qian. He was here today to supervise the production of the clothes. There was no choice. With the sudden arrival of 4.5 million Han citizens, even if each of them were to make 2 sets of clothes, they would need at least 9 million sets. Furthermore, these were just outerwear. What about underwear? What was different? What was the need? It must be said that the people who came to the southern Ming Empire were all refugees. Many of them were wearing clothes that had been around for who knew how long. Therefore, things like lice and pests would definitely exist. When they entered the new pier, each of them was given an outerwear. As for their previous clothes, they were all gathered together and burned. It was just that these 4.5 million sets of clothes were still in stock from the previous garment factory. Moreover, they were not custom-made. As a result, some people's clothes were too short, while some people's clothes were a little too long for their children. There was nothing that could be done about it. After all, it had only been a little more than a month since they received the news that there were so many refugees. To be able to produce 4.5 million sets of clothes in such a short period of time was already not easy. Regarding this situation, Yu Qian naturally had some understanding. However, it was useless for him to understand. Right now, there were so many people waiting for a change of clothes. Being urged by his subordinates, he came to the main garment factory and gathered the directors of the branch factories to see if there was a way to solve the problem. Factory directors, I won't say too much. It's all about work. How about this? The underwear factory and the military uniform factory temporarily stop your work and focus on producing ready-made clothes to increase production. What do you think? After gathering the directors, Yu Qian stated his intentions and looked at everyone with an expectant expression. How can that be? As soon as his voice fell, a voice of objection immediately sounded. Our underwear factory is still being urged to produce goods. Lord Yu, you also know how popular our underwear is right now. We can earn a lot of money for Red Nest City. How can we stop just like that? The one who shook her head was the director of the underwear factory, Mei Ling. Like her name, Mei Ling was not only beautiful, but the underwear factory was also in good order under her leadership. It earned a lot of money for Red Nest City. Being able to earn money was where her confidence came from. Even when facing Yu Qian, the person in charge of Red Nest City, she still said whatever she wanted to say. Just as Mei Ling's voice fell, another burly man's voice sounded. The military uniform factory still has a lot of tasks that haven't been completed yet. Lord Yu, you don't know. The soldiers on the front lines are very brave, but their lives are very tough. We can't just watch them win in tattered clothes. Needless to say, the one who counterattacked was the director of the military uniform factory, Fang Lei. As a former burly man in the military, because he injured his body during training, he had no choice but to retire and work elsewhere. Under his leadership, the military uniform factory's work was very effective. Even the director of an underwear factory dared to talk back to Yu Qian, let alone a military uniform factory backed by the military. As one of the dozens of Cold Vanguard members personally trained by Yang Chendong, Fang Lei's qualifications were also extremely old. When Fang Lei spoke, he had such confidence. Chapter 548. Yu Qian's face was a bit ugly after being contradicted by two subordinates. Fortunately, he knew that this was not a personal grudge, but for work. Although he was a bit unhappy, it was still within the range that he could understand. The head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua, who had been standing at the side without saying anything, glared at Mei Ling and Fang Lei before saying in an embarrassed tone, Lord Yu, they are only speaking from a work point of view. If they have offended you in any way, please don't take it to heart. Although she was only the head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua's words were more forceful than humble. First of all, as the director of the main factory here, Zhou Hua would definitely be biased and consider the interests of the whole garment factory first. Secondly, and most importantly, who did not know the position of the Luan family in the entire Qiqian city? The head of the family was the head of the most popular power plant. His eldest son was a battalion-level political worker. His daughter was even more powerful. Not only was she the head of the propaganda department, she was also rumored to be one of the future concubines of the God Lord. So what if she was a concubine? In the entire Qiqian city, who knew how many girls wanted to have such an identity? Even being a servant girl by the God Lord's side would make many people envious. That was equivalent to being a close official. People said that the gate of the Prime Minister was a 7th-rank official. Because of this, who knew how many people went to the Luan family to propose marriage? If Luan Shaochen wanted to choose a wife, he would definitely be very picky. As the woman in charge of the Luan family and the head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua's position was clearly very high. Towards Zhou Hua, Yu Qian was also very respectful. Not for any other reason, but because of her ability to work. Once the higher-ups gave her a task, she would always do her best to complete it. She would even exceed the quota. If not for the fact that there were too many Han people this time, the work in the garment factory would have been very satisfactory. AI. Letting out a long sigh, Yu Qian said with an ugly expression, I know that everyone has their own difficulties, but didn't the Duke of Loyalty say that people need to be human? Money can be earned again. The soldiers' clothes can be mended and used again. But those Han people who came from afar don't have a second set of clothes. They don't even have a change of clothes. In such an environment and conditions, it's too difficult to expect them to have a sense of belonging. It's not easy for us to do our job. Since Yu Qian spoke of his own difficulties, the others naturally did not say anything. Although they did not say anything, their attitude was firm. It was not so easy to change. The atmosphere seemed to be in a stalemate, causing everyone's expressions. But at this moment, a loud voice sounded, "Lord Yu is right. Everything must be based on the people. I think the garment factory still needs more support." Who? When they heard someone commenting on the work of the garment factory, and from the tone, it seemed to be Yu Qian, the directors of the branch factories became a little unhappy. In particular, Fang Lei, the head of the military uniform factory, turned around and looked fiercely in the direction of the voice. The few of them looked in the direction where the voice came from. What they had in common was that when they saw the person who spoke, everyone was stunned on the spot. After that, Fang Lei, who was from the military, reacted the fastest. He strode forward with a face full of excitement. "Sixth young master, you've come." "Hee, factory director Fang Lei, how is it? Are you used to working here as a military person?" Yang Qindong laughed and called out the other party's name. The person who came was Yang Qindong. Ever since he released the qi in his body, his senses had become exceptionally sharp. Just now, he was accompanied by Ling Song, Gao Xiong, and the others as they walked over. While they were still far away, he heard the conversation between Yu Qian and the others. Fang Lei, who was called out, was very excited. He did not expect that after more than 3 years, Yang Qindong could still recognize him at a glance. This excitement made his eyes brim with tears. "Sixth young master, I'm still used to it." "Get used to it." Yang Qindong walked to Fang Lei's side and took the initiative to shake hands with him. Then, he patted Fang Lei's shoulder and said, "Everything is work. As long as you put your heart into it, you will still contribute. When the time comes, the people will not forget you." "Yes, yes." After receiving Yang Qindong's encouragement, Fang Lei's tears flowed uncontrollably. He originally thought that because of his body's condition, the sixth young master would forget about him after he left the army. Now, it seemed that he had thought too much. After shaking hands with Fang Lei, Yang Qindong hurriedly took a few steps forward. He took the initiative to greet the other factory directors and shook hands with them one by one. When he shook hands with Zhou Hua, he took the initiative to call out, "Aunt Zhou." As soon as Lin Mengya called her auntie, Zhou Hua's smile immediately spread across her face, as if she had drunk honey. This scene was seen by Wan Xiaoyu, who was among the crowd behind them. Her face immediately flushed red and she was very happy. This was the face that the sixth young master gave her. Thinking about it, in Crimson City, how many people could claim to be his senior? After shaking hands with everyone and thanking them for their hard work, Yang Qindong finally came in front of Yu Qian. Then, he said with a smile on his face, "Sir you've worked hard during this period." You've worked hard too." With a straight face, Yu Qian was a little uncomfortable. Thinking back to when he was in Baiming, Yu Qian still had a lot of opinions about Yang Qindong. He thought that this young man was a little too arrogant and always looked down on others. He preferred to be unconventional and such people had to be dealt with properly. Therefore, he was willing to do anything that could make Yang Qindong uncomfortable. But who would have thought that he would actually become someone else's subordinate? This was really fate making a fool out of him. Yu Qian's awkwardness was within Yang Qindong's expectations. However, Yu Qian was a capable person and he respected capable people very much. Therefore, he would not talk about the past in front of everyone, let alone make things difficult for Yu Qian. On the contrary, after greeting the few people, he stood firmly on Yu Qian's side and gave a speech. "Factory directors, Sir Yu's words are very reasonable. I once said that technology is the number one productivity, but at the same time, we have to put people first. This time, we spent a lot of money to liberate more than 4 million Han civilians from the southern Ming dynasty. They are our brothers. As a family, how can we watch our brothers have no clothes to wear? I don't think that's possible. Therefore, I personally suggest that the underwear factory and military uniform factory cooperate with the garment factory and solve the problem of the civilians wearing clothes first. As for making money, it can be done at any time. Take care of the uniforms carefully and sew them up. I'm sure the cute soldiers below won't have any objections, right? When he said the last sentence, Yang Qindong had already turned around and looked at Lang Song and Gao Xiong behind him. Yes, sixth young master is right. Our army and the civilians are one family. It's only right that we help each other. Lang Song and Gao Xiong looked at Yang Qindong's gaze and knew what to say. Although this was Yang Qindong's personal suggestion, the entire Crimson City was created by him. What difference was there between his words and the emperor's decree? As for whether Mei Ling and Fang Lei would have any opinions. Not to mention that they had no way of refuting Yang Qindong's decision. He could decide their future with just a few words. Who would joke about this matter? What, if you don't want to work anymore, then leave. A three-legged toad is hard to find, but aren't there plenty of two-legged talents? Yes, we will immediately follow the sixth young master's instructions. Zhou Hua immediately expressed her stance. This time, no one dared to object. The matter was resolved. Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't have any other instructions, Zhou Hua told the factory directors to do what they were supposed to do. Originally, he wanted to let Yang Qindong say a few words, but considering that he had just returned to Crimson City and didn't know much about the various matters, he was afraid that what he said at this time would be biased, so he decided to find another opportunity. After leaving the garment factory, the person beside Yang Qindong changed to Yu Qian. Compared to the awkwardness when the two met, when they talked about work, Yu Qian's expression slowly returned to normal. Yang Qindong also had a rough understanding of the current Crimson City from Yu Qian. After the destruction of Jiaoji, about 500,000 people migrated from there. In addition to the 4,500,000 from southern Ming, the population increased by about 5 million. For the Yangtze government, which only had a population of 1 million, the pressure was obvious. In Yu Qian's words, whether it was Crimson City or even the entire Ryukyu Island, there was a limit to the number of people it could support. Even if they took down the first Shang dynasty and completely liberated this place, the population shouldn't be too high. Otherwise, the pressure would be too great. Yang Qindong had a better understanding of Ryukyu Island than anyone else. It was only 6 million people. Even if the remaining 1 million people from the first Shang dynasty were included, it was only 7 million people. For Ryukyu Island, which had a surface area of 36,008 square kilometers, it wasn't much of a pressure. From what he knew, the population of Ryukyu Island in the past had reached 20 million people. Other than the lack of housing, didn't the people there live quite well? However, since this question was raised by Yu Qian, Yang Qindong naturally couldn't deny it. Instead, he nodded and said, "All right, I understand. However, Lord Yu, don't worry. Now that we have conquered Jiaoji, it will become our second base. After that, we will conquer the Lansang Kingdom and the other small countries nearby. When that time comes, the pressure on the population will shift." Chapter 549. Listening to Yang Qindong talk about these things so casually, Yu Qian was very shocked. At this time, he really wanted to ask what Yang Qindong's goal was. If one day he really cleaned up the small countries nearby, what attitude would he use to face the great Ming dynasty? Could it be that he wanted to overthrow them? However, this kind of question was just a thought in his heart. Although he was now in charge of Crimson City, he still knew what to ask and what not to ask. The most important thing was that Yu Qian was also a nationalist in his bones. He also believed in the phrase, "Those who are not of my race must have a different heart," so he was supportive of Yang Chendong's actions. Yang Chendong had returned to Crimson City, but under his intentional suppression, this news did not spread too widely. Although some people knew that the godlike young master had returned to the island, there were too few people who had seen him. Adding on the fact that everyone had a lot of work to do, there were many things that they had to do, so not many people paid attention to this matter. This was the result that Yang Chendong wanted to see. After all, there were suddenly so many people on the island. He wouldn't believe that there weren't spies from the Great Ming Dynasty and other forces. Although the military had already controlled the way out of the island, it was better to be low-key just in case. If he was low-key, no one would pay attention to him. Even if some spies really escaped, they wouldn't be able to get conclusive evidence that he was the leader of the mercenaries. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong was so careful. The Great Ming Dynasty was still very powerful. Especially when there was new news that Biming had developed some new cannons. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the new cannons would be equipped in the army. After the Southern Ming Dynasty received so much help, the promotion of firearms would also be put on the agenda. With Biming and the Southern Ming Dynasty being in each other's shoes, the Southern Ming Dynasty would probably steal the new cannons that Biming developed. They would also be equipped with new cannons. Perhaps this was the change that Yang Chendong's arrival brought to them. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. In short, his opponent's strength had become stronger, so he had to be careful. Before he had a strong enough army, he still had to be cautious when dealing with the Great Ming Dynasty. Although he didn't want to meet with ordinary people, he still wanted to meet with some of the higher-ups and factory directors. Firstly, it was to encourage them and show that he valued them. Secondly, if there were any problems, he would be able to help them solve one or two. Just like that night when he arrived at Crimson City, Yang Chendong first met with Wan Qi, the director of the power plant, in the palace that had been built long ago. Electricity, as an advanced technology, had already been used in some practical work in Crimson City. For example, the machinery of the textile factory, the simple mixer and production of the cement factory, the craft of the glass factory, the machinery of the paper mill and the brewery, the craftsmen and blacksmiths working with iron and steel, and so on. There were also things like the arts troupe, the publicity department's performance, as well as things like civilian electricity. Electricity was very complicated. If there was only one idea, it would be very difficult to turn it into reality. However, once it was really done, it would be much simpler. After the cultivation and use of rubber on a large scale, it would be even simpler to use. Yang Chendong called Wan Qi over mainly to talk to him about the use and situation of electricity. Wan Qi might be very impressive in front of outsiders, and even many departments that used electricity needed to have a good relationship with him to do things. However, in front of Yang Chendong, he had always been very humble. He wouldn't forget that electricity came from the sixth young master's ideas, and even a lot of his knowledge was learned from the books that the sixth young master gave him. It could be said that in front of the sixth young master, he was just a primary school student. Because he was really humble, when facing Yang Chendong, Wan Qi gave a detailed report of everything he knew. For example, the current needs of electricity, as well as some projects that were being developed. For example, tap water would not work if there was a lack of electricity. There was no way to filter and drink it. When some machines used electricity, the voltage was unstable, and they were constantly overcoming difficulties. Yang Chendong listened very carefully. Often when he encountered a problem, he would tell Wan Qi some of the situations that he saw in the future. However, he was not a professional after all, so he could only point out a direction. He would go back to the warehouse to see if there were any relevant books. Throughout the night, the two of them chatted a lot. In the end, Yang Chendong took out some drawings. There were pictures of rice cookers, induction cookers, and simple electric kettles. These were all related to people's livelihood. Speaking of which, it was not very complicated after electricity was connected. In fact, the sixth young master wanted to simplify things first. Once Wan Qi and the others could really use it skillfully, then they could consider making electric scooters. After sending Wan Qi away, Yang Chendong met with the student Feng Ku, who had been waiting outside for a long time. Feng Ku was in the first batch of students at the Yang Family Academy. He was originally a student in dire straits, but he was very smart and his ideas were also very imaginative. In Yang Chendong's opinion, he had the potential to be a scientist and creator. This time, he called Feng Ku over to let him make a bicycle. Since they were going to use electric scooters, of course, the bicycle had to be made first. In contrast, the bicycle did not require too much knowledge. It only needed a blueprint. Then, the craftsmen and blacksmiths just needed to make the relevant parts. With rubber tires, it could be said that everything was ready. Feng Ku left with the bicycle blueprint with joy and excitement. He believed that tonight would be a sleepless night for him. Are you still not going to rest? After drinking a few pots of tea, Hu Yan, as the first madam, appeared in the side hall of the palace. Stretching his body, Yang Chendong smilingly patted his right leg. He knew that he was too eager to achieve success, which resulted in him neglecting the few ladies. It was truly a sin. Although they were already an old couple, Hu Yan still sat down on Yang Chendong's lap with a blushing face. Then, with a hug, her body was suspended in the air. Then came the sound of Yang Chendong's laughter. In his arms, Hu Yan buried her head very deeply. Such a shy appearance made Yang Chendong unable to stop himself from having a primitive impulse. Let's go. It's late, it's time to rest, ha 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 ha. Yang Chendong's laughter resounded in the palace. Then, with Hu Yan in his arms, he strode toward the bedroom at the back of the palace. The moon hid in the clouds shyly. That night, Yang Chendong showed his power. The qi in his body became very active. Not only did he subdue Hu Yan, but he also hugged the other two madams, Lady Shui and Su Munair. Even so, it still did not satisfy him. If he did not consider that they were his wives and did not want to ravage them too much, he was afraid that after this night, the three of them would not be able to get out of bed for 3 days. After a night of absurdity, they had unlocked too many embarrassing positions. The 3 women accompanied Yang Chendong until dawn. After that, they fell into a deep sleep. On the contrary, Yang Chendong became even more spirited. He felt that with the help of qi, his whole body was refreshed. At this moment, it was as if his strength had obtained another breakthrough. After sleeping with the 3 women, he walked out of the bedroom and came to an empty martial arts field. He started to practice martial arts. Indeed, it gave people the feeling that he was a juggler. If there were people from later generations here, they would definitely watch all of this as if they were watching a martial arts movie. The only difference was that Yang Chendong did not install any auxiliary items such as wires on his body. In other words, Yang Chendong's leap was more than 10 feet high. It was completely done with his own strength. 10 feet was 3 meters. More than 10 feet could reach a height of 4 meters. However, Yang Chendong could jump straight to such a height after forcefully pulling out the scallion from the dry land. If he was given a chance to run, he would probably jump half a meter higher. This could be described as Qin Gong. In fact, even Qin Gong was not as powerful as this. After all, there was a limit to the jumping speed of the human body. It was already good for an average person to jump about half a meter. It was already shocking for those professional basketball players to jump more than a meter. However, these were nothing in front of Yang Chendong at this moment. Feeling that his body was as light as a swallow, and the existence of the qi seemed to allow him to perform all kinds of dangerous actions that existed in his imagination at will. After there was absolutely no difficulty, Yang Chendong tried his best to break through. Waves of turbid qi were spat out, and his body became more vigorous. Fortunately, this place was very close to the bedroom in the back hall of the palace. Usually, no one would appear here. Even the soldiers of the first and second guard teams could not appear here without orders. After all, everyone wanted privacy. No man would want his wife to be stared at by other men every day, right? It was precisely because of this that Yang Chendong's performance today was not discovered by anyone. Otherwise, who knew how big of a commotion it would cause? A full half an hour, which was equivalent to an hour now. After an hour of high-difficulty training, Yang Qindong finally stopped the movements of his hands with a satisfied face. After the extremely active qi in his body, he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to absorb the essence in the air. The season of the year was in spring, and the time of the day was in the morning. The air in the morning was often extraordinarily fresh. In this fresh air, there seemed to be some qi of heaven and earth mixed in. These were all unceremoniously absorbed by Yang Qindong into his body, and finally turned into a cloud of white mist that appeared above the head of the sixth young master. This scene looked very unrealistic. In this regard, Yang Qindong did not have the slightest idea. It was not until another 2 hours had passed that he felt that his body could not absorb too much air that he slowly opened his eyes and stood up slowly. Chapter 550. At this moment, he felt that the bones in his body seemed to have become lighter. On the contrary, the strength of each punch was more than 10% stronger than before. Could it be that it can improve my body's quality and strength? I should try it more often in the future. A rare look of curiosity or even lust appeared on his face. Yang Qindong hummed a tune that no one else could understand as he left the place. After a morning of training, he was too hungry. He urgently needed food to replenish his energy. After a night of tiring, Yang Qindong didn't show any signs of fatigue. Instead, he was full of energy. After eating 3 people's worth of breakfast, he left with the first and second guard squad. After coming to Resin City, there were too many things that required his attention. There were also too many industries that required his guidance. For example, the weapon factory and shipyard, these kinds of industries that were obviously very high-tech. Since the invention of electricity, there was a big breakthrough in this kind of research. The production of some items could even be considered as an assembly line operation. Or it could be said that the conditions were ripe. The next step was to build lathes. On this point, Yang Qindong didn't dabble much in it in his previous life. The only thing he could do was to describe some scenes that he saw in his previous life. Then, he took out some related books for them to study. Even so, it brought a great shock to these professional researchers. They all looked at Yang Qindong with admiration and even worship. In their eyes, their sixth young master seemed to be omnipotent. The inspection and guidance took a total of 7 days. On the morning of the 8th day, after sleeping with 4 people as usual, he finished his training in the morning. After eating breakfast, he directly brought the guards to the military building in Resin City. This building that was painted green on the outside was the military headquarters of the Yang faction's new army. It was where the head of the military was located. For example, Ling Song and Gao Xiong, the 2 division commanders, had their own offices here. This morning, it could be said that the military officers were gathered here. A group of military officers with the ranks of senior colonel, colonel, lieutenant colonel, and major were standing in the plaza in front of the building. They attracted the attention of many people in the building. This was the first time something like this had happened. Although there were already quite a number of officers in the building, most of the time, everyone was busy with their own matters. How could it be as complete and lively as this time? To be able to make so many officers appear here and wait peacefully, other than Yang Qindong, who was known as the god of war in the military, no one else would be able to do this. They're here. Men. A lieutenant colonel hurriedly ran back to the courtyard. When he returned to his team, he brought the news that Yang Qindong had arrived. Not long after, Yang Qindong, who was dressed in a marshal's uniform, arrived in front of the military headquarters under the escort of dozens of guards. Salute. Ling Song took the lead and gave the command. Immediately, the 20-something officers raised their right arms and gave a standard military salute. Yang Qindong stopped in his tracks and returned a solemn and serious military salute. After that, he laughed and went forward to shake the hands of the high-ranking officers, trying to get closer to each other. Those who were here today were all elites of Ling Feng. They were all at least battalion-level officers. On the army side, there was the division commander of the 1st Regiment, Ling Song, the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Mo Chengyu, the chief of staff of the 1st Regiment, Ting Shan, the 2nd Battalion commander, Ling Dechang, the 3rd Battalion commander, Xiao Yi-ning, the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pe, the 2nd Regiment commander, Kong Jie, the 2nd Regiment commander, Kong Chuanxin, the 3rd Battalion commander, Tian Su, the 3rd Regiment commander, Wu Sheng, the political commissar, Chen Bo, and the 3rd Battalion commander, Chang Yang. On the Navy side, there was the division commander of the 1st Regiment, Gao Xiong, the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Ji Fei, the chief of staff of the 1st Regiment, Yu Guang, the 2nd Battalion commander, Ding Yan, the 3rd Battalion commander, Zhao Changwang, the 2nd Regiment commander, Nye Tong, the 2nd Regiment commander, Long Yin Tian, the 2nd Battalion commander, He Gong, and the 3rd Battalion commander, Gu Yang. It was no exaggeration to say that these people were the ones who formed the upper echelon of Ling Feng. Of course, there were a few officers who were not present. For example, Battalion Commander Xiao Feng, who had been in charge of Baiming's capital, but they were still in the minority. Yang Chendong, who had shaken hands with all the division, regiment, and battalion officers, was led into the headquarters by Leng Song and Gao Xiong. In the spacious conference room, Yang Chendong listened to the officers' reports on their work and gave some encouraging instructions. Then, everyone came to the sand table, where the division commander of the army, Leng Song, personally introduced the current situation of the first Shang dynasty to Yang Chendong and everyone else. Yes, the most important reason for his visit today, other than to see everyone and express the importance he attached to them, was to discuss the plan to destroy the first Shang dynasty. More than 3 years ago, from the moment he set his sights on Ryukyu Island, this plan had been in progress. Furthermore, with consecutive victories, the first Shang dynasty, which seemed to be flourishing, was suppressed to the new north region. After Tainan and Taichung were occupied, the first Shang dynasty had been struggling at death's door. It was like a terminally ill old man, who knew if he would be able to open his eyes again the next day after he fell asleep. Would the country still exist the next day? If not for the fact that they had to take into consideration their digestive ability, the first Shang dynasty would have long ceased to exist. In the process of exterminating Jiaoji, the Yang faction had developed greatly. This was especially so when they made use of the Southern Ming Empire's money to trade for 4.5 million Han citizens. The Yang faction finally had the ability to swallow up the number 1 Shang dynasty. Today's meeting was to formulate a military plan to exterminate another country. At the beginning of the meeting, Leng Song introduced the situation. He held a command stick in his hand and introduced the situation to everyone with a serious face. The new North region is the most prosperous region in the first Shang dynasty. In comparison, the economic conditions there are much better than Tainan and Taichung that we have occupied. This can be seen from the fact that no one has crossed the border recently. As a country that has only been established for less than 50 years, they are still full of vitality. Especially the 7th king, Shangde. Although he is still very young, he is indeed very capable. In the past 3 years, the spies that we have sent out have reported that they are actively working on military defense and training their soldiers. Especially their navy, they are equipped with self-made cannons. Although their range and functionality cannot be compared to our navy, they are still considered to be of a certain scale. If it were other opponents, they would be able to put up a fight. Through Leng Song's introduction, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The butterfly effect that his appearance had brought about was indeed powerful. Even the remote first Shang dynasty had developed their own cannons. Although it could be seen from Leng Song's words that he didn't think highly of them, they were still cannons. It seemed like his development speed still needed to be increased. Otherwise, although he couldn't be surpassed by others in a short period of time, when his opponents became stronger, the pressure on him to conquer the world would also increase. Everyone, our spies have reported that the enemy's army is stationed at Hsinchu and Ilan. There are 50,000 soldiers in each of these 2 places. Moreover, there are trenches all over the place. Several lines of defense have formed a deep defensive net, causing a certain degree of difficulty for our army to charge head-on. As for the Navy, more than 600 warships have gathered at Keelung port. Although there aren't many of them of a large scale, at least 30 of them are equipped with cannons. The effective killing range is about 1 li. When they heard that the effective killing range was only 1 li, the officers below laughed out loud. Especially the Navy officers. The lowest firing range of the cannons they were equipped with was 3,000 meters. Naturally, 500 meters was nothing in their eyes. Many people were laughing, but only Yang Chendong couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He knew that the repeated victories had brought pride to these officers. Some people said that the victory of a war didn't depend on the number of people on both sides. This was because there were countless people who had proven that one side could win with fewer people. There were also people who said that the victory of a war didn't depend on whether the weapons were advanced or not. This was also fully reflected in the war against the United States. Even though the number of cannons the enemy used was almost the same as the number of soldiers they sent out, in the end, they still didn't obtain victory and didn't advance a single step. There were also people who said that the victory of a war couldn't be determined only by the results of the war. After all, horses could stumble. Even an adult man could be trapped by a child's trap if he wasn't paying attention. But now, these signs had appeared. At this moment, Yang Chendong couldn't help but say something. Just as many officers were smiling and had an indifferent expression, he suddenly opened his mouth. What? Are you guys very proud? That's, Out of instinct, one of the officers casually answered this sentence. But after realizing that it was the sixth young master who asked this question, the officer immediately stood on the spot with an awkward expression. The other officers who were still laughing and chatting also put away their smiles at this moment and put on a stern face. If the question just now was asked by Leng Song or any of Gao Xiong's teachers, they wouldn't feel any pressure. After all, the people who were here were all capable of fighting. They were all individuals with good personal qualities. They had even been through the tempering of war and were used to life and death. It was very difficult for these people to convince others. Even if your current position was higher than theirs, it didn't mean that your position would be higher than theirs in the future. Even if Leng Song, Gao Xiong, and the others obtained high positions, in the eyes of these officers, it was because they followed the sixth young master the earliest and had the opportunity to stand out. That was why they had their current achievements. On the contrary, if this opportunity was given to them, they could also perform as well or even better. This was the reason why some people were arrogant. The more arrogant and capable a person was, the more they naturally wouldn't submit to others. Even if that person was their superior, it was the same because the sixth young master had said more than once that those who were capable would rise and those who were mediocre would fall. There was no need to look at seniority. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.